Hello, my friends, and welcome to Night Whisper. This is a quiet place where we drift together into unanswered skies, slowly, calmly, and without fear. Here, we don't rush toward conclusions. We listen, we observe, and we let the mystery breathe. If these stories bring you a sense of calm or keep you company through the night, you're always welcome to stay with us. Subscribing gently helps this space grow, and it allows more quiet minds to find their way here. You can also leave a soft, like if the story helps you relax, unwind, or feel less alone beneath the night sky. And if any thoughts rise as you listen, you're welcome to share them in the comments below. And just out of quiet curiosity, where are you listening from tonight? I love seeing how far these whispers travel through the dark. Chapter 1. The Day the Sky Whispered. It was just before 11 in the morning on November 11th, 2014, and the central coast of Chile lay beneath a soft, clear light. The Pacific stretched in quiet blues and grays, its surface rippling gently under the faint brush of a coastal wind. From the shore, the ocean might have seemed serene, ordinary, just another morning. By the water above it in the sky, something quietly awaited unseen by the casual eye. A Chilean Navy Airbus Cougar, AS-532, hovered above the coastline, its rotor blades spinning with steady purpose, cutting through the gentle air with a muted hum that seemed to settle into the vast openness around it. Inside, two figures moved with calm precision, their movements smooth and familiar, practiced over years of duty. One was an experienced Navy captain, a man whose hands had guided countless aircraft through the ever-changing moods of the sky. Beside him sat a technician, Marcelo, eyes fixed on the bank of instruments, and screens before him operating a Westcam MX-15 HD FLIR camera, one of the most advanced infrared imaging systems available, capable of detecting heat patterns invisible to the human eye. The helicopter drifted west of Santiago, following the contours of the central Chilean coast. At about 4,500 feet, it traveled at 132 to 152 knots, a steady rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the morning. Sunlight fell soft and even over the cabin, illuminating the panels, the careful hands, and the instruments. Yet outside, the air shimmered with clarity. Unlimited visibility, 10 degrees Celsius. Not a cloud in sight to obscure the horizon. It was, in every way, a perfect day for observation. And yet, something was waiting. At exactly 13 hours, 52 minutes, and 34 seconds UTC, a distant anomaly appeared on the horizon. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a flicker of light, playing across the air above the ocean, dancing with the faint reflection of sunlight on water vapor. But the trained eyes of the crew did not dismiss it. Their attention sharpened instinctively, curiosity threading through their practiced calm. Marcelo adjusted the focus on the FLIR camera. The device worried softly as it locked onto the anomaly, magnifying it, measuring heat, revealing a presence that was impossible to ignore. And there it was, a shape, clear and defined against the cold blues of the Pacific, glowing with a brightness that did not belong to the surrounding sky. It floated, maintaining an altitude that mirrored the helicopter, traveling west-northwest, as if pacing the aircraft itself. There was a rhythm to its movement, not frantic, not chaotic yet, undeniably deliberate. The shape was perplexing. At times, it stretched long and thin, a soft, elongated form floating like a delicate brushstroke across the air. At others, it appeared flatter, almost horizontal, like a ribbon suspended in the wind. Witnesses would later describe it as a white semi-oval structure, or even as to rotating spheres dancing closely together. The images lingered in the minds of those who saw them, strange yet undeniable, both familiar and alien, drawing the mind toward questions without offering answers. Then it happened. Around 13:55 UTC, the object released something. At first, it seemed subtle, a gentle shimmer in the infrared display. But it was not subtle. It was heat, a plume of material hot enough to glow distinctly against the cooler air, expanded outward, blending into the clouds without falling, without succumbing to gravity. The infrared camera recorded temperatures over 50 degrees Celsius. It was as if the object had breathed warmth into the sky itself, a fleeting, luminous exhalation that left observers stunned in quiet awe. Seconds passed, then a second smaller ejection occurred, mirroring the first. 2 thermal signatures, both intense, both impossible to classify in simple terms. And yet, there was no sound, no smoke, no trail of debris, only to glow, only the evidence of energy moving in a manner entirely foreign to ordinary flight. The crew attempted to make contact over civilian radio channels. Their voices were calm, precise, professional, but there was no response. No signal, no echo, nothing. They switched to radar, their eyes scanning every panel, every blip, every trace. Ground radar, nothing. Onboard radar, nothing. The camera's radar, nothing. And yet, there it remained on the infrared screen. Persistent, luminous, moving with intent. Time seemed to stretch. The helicopter tracked the object over the ocean, following its path with careful precision. For nearly 10 minutes, the object maintained its pace, its altitude, its strange serenity. It did not accelerate unnaturally. It did not dart or spiral. It moved with deliberate grace, as if it belonged somewhere beyond the ordinary rules of air and wind. Then, as quietly as it had appeared, it vanished. Around 14:01 UTC, the object slipped behind a bank of clouds. There was no sudden ascent, no disappearing streak of light, just a gentle fade, like a secret being tucked away once more. The helicopter, steady and vigilant, began its return to base, carrying with it a cargo far heavier than any cargo hold could contain. Footage, measurements, and a mystery that demanded attention. The moment the helicopter landed, the routine patrol ended, and the investigation began. The crew handed over the raw infrared footage. It's over 1 gigabyte file, containing more than 9 minutes of subtle, precise, almost hypnotic observations. Every frame captured heat, movement, reflection, and resistance against the wind. Nuclear chemist Mario Avila would later note the object's brightness and energy emissions. Photogrammetric analyst Alberto Vergara would confirm controlled movements and resistance to environmental forces. The official timeline was precise, verified through GPS timestamps, flight logs, meteorological reports, and internal Navy documents. Declassified files, released years later through the Black Vault, confirmed the investigation had ruled out natural phenomena. No storms, no balloons, no weather anomalies. CEF, AA Chile's dedicated UAP investigative body treated the case with methodical seriousness. And still, even with this thorough documentation, questions remained. Could this have been a misidentified commercial aircraft, distant and distorted by the infrared lens? Skeptics proposed that possibility, pointing toward Iberia Flight IB 6830, whose engines might produce heat blooms, and whose contrails, at high altitude, cooled up PRS ejections. Another aircraft, Latomele 330, might explain additional aspects of the footage. And yet, the object's timing, its movement, its thermal signatures, they didn't fit perfectly into any simple explanation. The landscape itself mattered. This sighting did not occur over empty waters or deserted cliffs. It took place along a dense corridor of air traffic, roughly 80 to 130 nautical miles southwest of San Antonio, near shipping lanes and airport flight paths from Santiago SCR to Merino Benitez Airport. Visibility was clear, temperatures mild, skies empty of cloud-soaked conditions, ideal for both observation and for optical illusions, if one wished to find them. But for the trained eyes of the crew, nothing familiar could account for what they saw. As the investigation began, Chile's history with the unknown became important. CEFAA, founded in 1997, was not a bureau of speculation. It was a body of aviation safety. Chile had long recognized that unknown objects in controlled airspace posed real risks. From decades of sightings, from reports in San Clemente, the so-called UFO capital of Chile, authorities knew that vigilance and transparency were critical. This incident, therefore, was more than curiosity. It was responsibility, even now, in 2025. the footage resurfaces with renewed interest. Discussions online, threads on X, and comparisons to newer sightings, like a cigar-shaped object spotted off Chile's coast in March 2025, keep the mystery alive. Each replay, each analysis, each thought experiment brings viewers closer to the sensation of watching the sky, with a new attentiveness, wondering whether we notice what passes unseen above us every day. And so the sky that morning, calm and clear, holds its secret still. The helicopter, the crew, the infrared camera, they captured more than light and heat. They captured a moment that humbles perception, challenges certainty, and invites us into a gentle, lingering curiosity. For those who look upward, who wonder quietly and without fear, the question remains, what truly moves above us, quietly, unnoticed, until the right eyes are there to see it, and the sky, always patient, waits. The story above is just the first step. The sky had more to reveal, and the mystery of who would follow and why would unfold next. Chapter 2. Those Who Watch the Watchers. The morning of November 11th, 2014, was only the beginning. The object had faded into the clouds, leaving the Pacific once again calm, unbroken. But for the crew of the Chilean Navy Cougar, the moment had transformed the ordinary into something quietly extraordinary. They had seen what few would ever see, and now their role had shifted from observer to witness, and from witness to messenger. The sky had whispered a secret, and it was up to them to ensure it reached ears that would listen carefully. As the helicopter descended back toward base, the calmness of the ocean and the gentle sway of the aircraft contrasted sharply with the weight settling over the two men. Marcelo Nera, eyes still fixed on the now silent FLIR camera, felt the lingering warmth of the images, the ghosts of those thermal signatures hovering in his mind. He knew that in these few minutes, something significant had occurred. And yet, what that significance was remained elusive, like sunlight refracting through mist, visible, but hard to grasp fully. Upon landing, the first act was simple, yet profound. The crew submitted the footage to CEFAA, Chile's Committee for the Study of Anomalous Aerial Phenomena. This wasn't a casual handoff. CEFAA was not an institution of speculation or sensational headlines. It was a carefully structured organization, born from decades of measured attention to aviation safety, a place where every anomaly was taken seriously, every report methodically analyzed. To them, unidentified objects were not invitations to mystery. They were matters of responsibility. To understand why Chile reacted this way, it helps to look back further. The nation's engagement with the unknown did not begin in 2014. For decades, Chile had been a quiet observer of strange occurrences in the sky. Pilots, air traffic controllers, and military personnel had noted fleeting lights, unexplained movements, objects that did not match the profiles of conventional aircraft. Certain regions became focal points, areas where the unusual was almost expected, and where the ordinary became interlaced with subtle wonders. San Clemente, for example, earned the unofficial moniker Chile's UFO capital, a place where repeated reports had forced authorities to pay attention. From the 1960s through the 1970s, military units kept their own records, quietly noting sightings that were often dismissed publicly, if not entirely forgotten. But by the 1990s, a remarkable case drew the country's attention. A commercial aircraft crew reported a mysterious object that followed them for nearly 450 kilometers. The report shook confidence in the existing monitoring systems, and it became clear that ignoring such events was no longer an option. In response, Chile established CFA in 1997, under the Directorate General of Civil Aeronautics. Its purpose was singular and serious: to investigate anomalies in the airspace, to determine whether they posed risks, and to provide clear, evidence-based answers. CEFAA was a body of science and protocol, not speculation. Its approach was methodical, disciplined, and, above all, transparent, a model few countries had adopted at the time. By 2021, with growing global interest, CEFAA had expanded further, enhancing both its authority and its reach. And now, in 2014, this institutional structure would be tested. The helicopter footage was more than a recording, it was a question written across the sky. And CEFAA was tasked with deciphering its language. Leading the investigation was General Ricardo Bermudez, a man whose experience and calmness lent gravity to the proceedings. He was not a man given to exaggeration or dramatic pronouncements. His approach was meticulous, measured, and honest. We do not know what it was. He would later state a simple sentence that would echo far beyond Chilean borders. Quietly remarkable for its restraint and candor. Under his guidance, CEFI assembled a team that combined deep expertise with diverse perspectives. Mario Avila, a nuclear chemist, was called upon to analyze thermal behaviors and energy patterns. Luis Barrera, an astrophysicist, considered atmospheric conditions and celestial factors. Alberto Vergara, a photogrammetrist, studied the shape, distance, and motion of the object with painstaking care. Each expert brought a lens of rigor to the investigation, ensuring that every possibility was examined, every anomaly scrutinized. Avila's attention focused on the object's thermal signatures, noting patterns that suggested rotation, an internal structure, subtle variances in heat that hinted at a three-dimensional form rather than a flat illusion. Vergara's photogrammetric analysis confirmed controlled motion, resistance to wind, and deliberate maneuvering. Together, these observations painted a picture of an object that was in its movement and presence unlike anything routinely encountered in Chilean airspace. Even so, Chile's curiosity was not insular. They reached beyond their borders, inviting input from international experts. Francis Guypen looks into aerial phenomena, reviewing footage and notes. While they leaned initially toward a conventional explanation, perhaps an aircraft, they acknowledged inconsistencies, the absence of radar detection, the peculiar thermal ejections, the deliberate movement none fit neatly into a simple terrestrial narrative. Then came the skeptics. When CEFA released the footage publicly in 2017, voices from around the world weighed in. Among them was Mick West, a science writer known for meticulous analysis and careful skepticism. His focus was not on doubting the witness's integrity, but on examining perception and interpretation. West and others proposed explanations grounded in physics and environmental factors. Heat glare from distant aircraft engines, contrails forming in humid air, and perspective distortions could, under certain conditions, create illusions resembling solid objects or ejections of energy. These analyses were rigorous, detailed, and persuasive, but they did not entirely erase the questions that lingered in the infrared images. CEFA methodology contrasted with the skeptics, and yet, in essence, they were aligned in intent. Both sought the truth, each guided by evidence. CEFAA held 8 formal committee meetings, reviewing every detailed radar logs, satellite imagery, weather data, witness statements, and expert reports. Birds were ruled out. Drones were impossible at that distance and altitude. Meteorological phenomena did not match the observed conditions. In their reports, the investigators emphasized 2 features above all: the object's 3-dimensional volume and its apparent release of energy. Meanwhile, independent researchers reconstructed the event differently. They built 3-dimensional flight models, cross-referenced commercial flight paths, and ran infrared physics simulations. They asked a simple, humble question. Under these conditions, what could create the impression of an unusual object in the sky? Through careful alignment of time, distance, and thermal behavior, they demonstrated how high-altitude heads, at certain angles and distances, might appear anomalous on infrared cameras. Yet even with these reconstructions, discrepancies remained. The timing, the specific heat patterns, and the movement did not fully correspond to any single aircraft. This dual approach, official and independent, revealed an essential truth. About investigation itself, certainty is a rare companion. Reality often resides between explanations, shaded with ambiguity, requiring patience, curiosity, and restraint. For CIFA and the global observers, this case became a benchmark in rigorous, transparent inquiry. And behind all the analysis were people, men and women, who spent long hours observing, questioning, rechecking, and validating every fragment of data. They handled sensitive instruments, interpreted complex readings, and remained attentive to subtle patterns that others might overlook. Their work demanded not only technical skill but emotional resilience. For every anomaly, there is a human reaction. The wonder of recognition, the weight of responsibility, the tension between disbelief and trust in one's senses. For those inside CIFA, for Bermudez, Avila, Barrera, Vergara, and the rest of the team, the Chilean Navy sighting was not simply a case to close. It was a challenge to understanding, itself a quiet reminder that the sky holds more than it reveals, that our instruments, however sophisticated, are intermediaries between us and the truth, and that careful observation must always temper certainty with humility. Even in 2025, the echoes of those meetings, those analyses, those moments of quiet curiosity persist. The files, the infrared footage, the notes, the measurements, they circulate again online, inviting new eyes, new questions, and new perspectives. And in that circulation, the story gains life, not because it has been solved, but because it asks us to remain awake, attentive, and gently inquisitive. In the end, what this chapter reveals is simple. Behind every anomaly are observers who care, who listen, and who think. Behind every report, every measurement, every cautious conclusion, are human beings striving to make sense of the vast, intricate, and often silent expanse above us. And when we consider the mystery of the sky, it is as much about them as it is about what they saw. The watchers had done their part. Now the sky's secrets waited for interpretation, and the journey into understanding continued. Chapter 3. The object in the sky. The day had started with ordinary routine. A helicopter rising over the central coast of Chile, engines humming in steady rhythm, sunlight glinting off instruments and the metal fuselage. The sea stretched endlessly to the west, shimmering faintly with morning light, and the clouds hung lightly along the horizon, soft and almost lazy in their drift. It was a morning that invited nothing more remarkable than the usual patrol, the usual scan of the skies. And yet, it was precisely in such ordinary moments that the extraordinary often hides, waiting for a patient eye. The object first appeared not with fanfare, not with a sudden flash or a dramatic roar, but subtly like a ripple across the calm waters, almost imperceptible until you leaned closer. At 13 hours 52 minutes and 34 seconds UTC, a distant anomaly flickered on the FLIR monitor, tiny and bright against the cooler expanse of ocean and sky. Marcelo Nera, trained to read infrared images with a precision few could match, adjusted the camera with careful, deliberate movements. His fingers moved smoothly over dials and buttons, and his eyes, accustomed to subtle gradients of heat and shadow, locked onto the anomaly. It glowed in infrared like a faint lantern in the fog, distant yet insistent. The object was far away, 35 to 40 miles across the water, yet it held its presence. The infrared camera revealed something that the human eye might have missed entirely. 2 thermal hotspots, glowing brighter than the surrounding air, each like a pulse of heat against the blue-gray expanse. It shifted slightly in shape, elongated in one frame, flatter in another, sometimes almost semi-oval, sometimes nearly spherical. It moved in a rhythm, almost synchronous with the helicopter, drifting west-northwest, as though pacing the observers themselves. For the men in the cockpit, the sensation was subtle but undeniable. It was not fear, nor panic, but a quiet, almost reverent attention, as if the sky itself had paused, leaning in to watch along with them. Every adjustment of the camera, every check of instruments, felt weighted with possibility. Could this be a bird? No. Too large, too distant, too structured. Could it be a plane? The flight path didn't match anything in radar logs, and yet it moved not erratically, but deliberately, with purpose and control. Then, as if signaling the beginning of a more extraordinary chapter, the object released the first of its thermal ejections. Around 1355 UTC, a plume of hot material surged outward, bright against the cooler sky, registering above 50 degrees Celsius in the infrared imagery. The heat expanded, billowing gently but distinctly, blending into the thin clouds above the ocean's surface. It did not fall, did not obey gravity in the way a plume of smoke or debris might. It simply unfurled, luminous and fleeting, then faded softly into the background. A short while later, a second, smaller ejection appeared, echoing the first, yet distinct in its signature. Both plumes seemed alive, yet silent, tangible, yet ephemeral. The helicopter's sensors captured every detail with meticulous clarity, yet the object itself remained elusive, almost dreamlike, as though it existed on the edge of perception. No radar picked it up. No transponder signal. No sound reached the ears of the crew. And yet there it was, visible, undeniable in the infrared spectrum, hinting at a presence that defied simple categorization. Inside the cockpit, a quiet dialogue passed between the two men. Words were few, gestures are spot on. The pilot noted the object's altitude, its speed, the way it seemed to respond to the air currents. Nara's eyes flicked from screen to exterior view, his mind racing to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew about the physical world. The calm ocean below, the wind brushing against the rotors, the distant coastline it all grounded. The experience in reality, yet reality itself felt subtly different, stretched by the anomaly hovering miles away. As the minutes passed, the object maintained its pace. Its shape fluctuated gently, a subtle dance of geometry and heat, but never erratically. There was a rhythm to it, a quiet pulse that the infrared imagery revealed more clearly than any human eye could perceive. It was almost as if the object had its own awareness, its own quiet choreography, responding to the environment and yet moving with intention. The helicopter, with all its power and sophistication, felt secondary to this other presence. A silent observer in a scene larger than the sum of its instruments. Attempts to communicate yielded nothing. Civilian radio frequencies remained silent, the object unresponsive. Even as the crew scanned radar and satellite feeds, there was no detection. Ground stations registered nothing. Onboard radar was blank. The contradiction was as palpable as the sea breeze on the face of the pilot. A presence seen but not confirmed. Heard but not understood. Real and yet intangible. Time stretched. Moments that might have felt brief under ordinary circumstances became elongated, each second drawn out by the intensity of observation. The human mind tends to collapse time when confronting the unknown. But the instruments told a continuous story, a 9-minute tableau that would later become critical evidence. Within those minutes, the helicopter followed the object as it moved steadily along its course, witnessing the play of thermal signatures, the pulsing, the subtle rotations that hinted at a volume beyond mere light and heat. The sky had become a theater, the anomaly both actor and stage. For the men in the cockpit, there was a mixture of astonishment and disciplined observation. Their training provided structure, a framework for interpreting the data. But it could not entirely erase the wonder. Each plume, each shift in shape, each steady, deliberate movement suggested something beyond familiar machines or atmospheric tricks. Yet the crew restrained their imagination, recording, logging, and verifying with meticulous care. Here curiosity was balanced by responsibility, or tempered by evidence. The ocean beneath remained serene, a mirror to the sky's shifting light. The horizon stretched endlessly, the line between sea and sky, almost imperceptible in some moments, blurred by haze and sun. The helicopter's shadow crossed gentle swells, unnoticed by the creature above, unnoticed by anything below. It was a moment suspended, a quiet intersection of human attention and cosmic possibility. As the final minutes of observation approached, the object moved closer to a gentle bank of clouds. By 1401 UTC, it slowly disappeared from view, folding into the atmosphere as naturally as a bird slipping behind a tree. There was no rush, no dramatic escape, just the quiet vanishing of a presence that had lingered long enough to leave its mark. The helicopter turned homeward, engines humming softly, the crew absorbing the silence that followed the extraordinary. Yet the story did not end in those minutes. What had been seen, what had been captured in infrared clarity, demanded scrutiny, demanded interpretation. It was no longer merely a sighting. It was a question cast across the skies of Chile, a quiet inquiry into the limits of human perception, technology, and imagination. And it was only the beginning of an investigation that would span months, involve experts of multiple disciplines, and eventually draw the attention of the world. Behind the cameras, behind the radar feeds, behind the data and measurements, were people grappling with the unknown. Their minds traced every curve of the infrared image, noted every subtle shift, every pulse of thermal energy. They reconstructed distances, velocities, trajectories, and energy profiles, seeking patterns and explanations. Each detail mattered, because when the anomaly could not be touched or heard, every nuance in the data became a clue, a thread leading toward understanding or toward new questions. Some specialists began to speak of possibilities. Was this a new atmospheric phenomenon, previously unobserved but natural? Was it a misidentified aircraft, appearing unusual due to distance, heat, and perspective? Or was it something entirely different, something that defied existing categories? Each theory was weighed, tested, and scrutinized, yet none fully accounted for every detail. The object resisted simple categorization, like a shadow at the edge of vision that dissolves. When directly looked at, the quiet debate unfolded with care and patience. Experts like Mario Avila, Alberto Vergara, and Luis Barrera contributed their analysis, grounded in physics, photogrammetry, and atmospheric science. Observations were cross-referenced, inconsistencies noted, and hypotheses carefully considered. And alongside them, skeptical analysts explored alternative explanations, testing the limits of perception, the behavior of infrared, and the ways the mind interprets ambiguous stimuli. The dialogue was a testament to measured curiosity, to disciplined exploration of the unknown. And yet, beyond the technicalities, there was the human experience, the subtle awe, the contemplative pause, the quiet wonder of witnessing something that did not fit neatly into known categories. It was not fear. It was not panic. It was attention deepened into presence, a recognition of the limits of knowledge, and a gentle acknowledgement that the universe is often more complex, more layered, and more mysterious than our immediate understanding allows. As the days turned into weeks, and the footage circulated among experts, the anomaly continued to inspire quiet reflection. It became a case study, not merely of an object in the sky, but of human curiosity, of disciplined observation, of the delicate balance between skepticism and wonder. The Pacific, once calm and unbroken, had borne witness to something that quietly challenged perception, and now it passed into the minds of those who would consider it carefully, thoughtfully, with both caution and reverence. In that sense, the object in the sky was not just a phenomenon, it was a teacher. It instructed patience, it demanded attention, and it reminded all who studied it that the boundaries of knowledge are often defined, not by what we see, but by how carefully we observe. Every shift, every thermal pulse, every fleeting silhouette became part of a narrative that required listening, watching, and waiting. It was a story written in infrared light, a narrative that unfolded silently, yet profoundly, across minutes that stretched into meaning. By the time the investigation truly began in earnest, the object had already left its quiet impression. And as we move deeper into the evidence, the thermal patterns, the movement, the analysis that would follow, it is important to carry with us this sense of attentive wonder, because in these small, patient observations lies the heartbeat of the story, the rhythm of curiosity, and the quiet invitation to explore the skies not only with instruments, but with the mind attuned to possibility. And so, the object lingered in memory and infrared alike, patiently waiting to be understood or at least gently studied. Chapter 4. The plumes and the patterns. The sky remained soft, pale, and endless as the helicopter traced its path over the coast. The ocean below rippled in gentle swells, silvered by the morning sun, and the horizon stretched unbroken, a delicate line where the water met the drifting clouds. In that vast, open space, every small movement became a story, every shift in light or shadow a question waiting to be asked. And it was in this quiet, expansive world that the object revealed one of its most remarkable secrets. The plumes. At first, the ejections seemed almost accidental, fleeting, as if the object had merely brushed against the air and left a trace. But as Marcelo Nera adjusted the FLIR camera, tracking the anomaly with meticulous precision, it became clear that these were deliberate and distinct events. Around 1355 UTC, the first plume emerged, a hot, luminous burst, bright against the cooler air surrounding it. In the infrared display, it glowed like a tiny flare, a living pulse of energy that expanded slowly and then blended softly into the wisps of cloud above the Pacific. The plume moved differently from any exhaust or smoke the men had encountered in their years of flying. It did not fall in the way a plume of steam or soot might. Instead, it unfolded like a gentle bloom, expanding outward with subtle grace. The helicopter hovered, instruments humming quietly, as the two men observed. It was mesmerizing. It was subtle yet impossible to ignore. Each ripple of heat seemed to carry intention, a pattern, a rhythm that teased the limits of understanding. And then, just as the crew's attention had settled into the quiet rhythm of observation, the second plume appeared. Smaller, more concentrated, yet equally defined. It too shimmered. In the infrared spectrum, a gentle flare that did not obey gravity, that did not drift with the wind. These twin plumes suggested something more than ordinary some activity. Some motion, or perhaps some interaction with the environment that no one had expected. The helicopter moved in its own smooth arc, following the object with the practiced precision of seasoned pilots. The rotors hummed like a heartbeat, steady and unbroken, while below, the ocean reflected faint glimmers of infrared warmth in ways that the human eye could not discern. Marcelo adjusted the camera angle slightly, and the object's form revealed more detail. The two glowing hotspots that defined its shape, almost like watchful eyes, or carefully positioned lights. The plume and the object existed together in a quiet choreography, as though performing for the observers in a private, invisible theater. The pilot and technician exchanged few words, but their eyes spoke volumes. They were acutely aware of the impossibility of simply ignoring this. It was not threatening, but it was undeniably present. Each plume, each subtle shift in shape or brightness, invited reflection, careful note-taking, and patient attention. The object seemed to communicate through movement and heat, leaving patterns for the human mind to decipher, yet never offering direct answers. The FLIR camera captured the pulses of heat in remarkable detail. The first plume lingered, spreading in gentle arcs, expanding yet never dispersing fully. It was almost as though the material carried its own form of buoyancy, a defiance of natural expectation that left the crew in quiet contemplation. The second plume, smaller, but just as vivid, mirrored the first in a delayed echo, creating a sense of symmetry, of balance, as if the object understood how it would be perceived, framing its presence with a subtle, almost artistic precision. The infrared footage later revealed nuances that were almost invisible to the naked eye. Within the plumes, the temperature gradients shifted gradually, bright cores fading into softer halos. Tiny eddies of heat suggested motion within motion, currents within currents. The helicopter's sensors picked up these differences, but the human mind had to interpret them, to sense the patterns, to find coherence in what otherwise seemed like fleeting light. In those moments, the sky became not just a space, but a canvas of energy, motion, and quiet purpose. It was easy, in the calm of the cockpit, to let thoughts wander. Was this a natural phenomenon? Could there be unseen currents, temperatures, or pressures interacting in ways that the camera exaggerated? Or was this something designed, intentional, capable of exerting control even at a distance? Every instinct the crew had honed over years of training whispered possibilities, yet offered no certainties. The object remained a puzzle, a quiet riddle in a vast blue expanse. Beyond the physical properties, the behavior of the object suggested an intelligence of observation rather than aggression. It moved with deliberation, never erratic, never rushed. The plumes, while luminous and extraordinary, were gentle, almost shy in their revelation. There was a rhythm to them, a repeated pattern that invited careful measurement. A first, larger emission, followed by a smaller one, spaced just enough to create a sense of continuity and calm intrigue. It was as though the sky itself had learned to breathe with the anomaly, a silent dialogue of heat, shape, and movement. The crew's instruments registered the thermal signatures with precision, but human interpretation remained crucial. The pilot tracked the relative position, measuring speed, distance, and altitude, while Nara focused on the infrared display, noting brightness fluctuations, subtle rotations, and the way each plume expanded and faded. Their observations were meticulous, patient, and steady. In this shared attentiveness, the men experienced something rare: the intimate intersection of human perception and unexplained reality, a quiet acknowledgement that not everything could be captured in data alone. As the minutes stretched, the object continued to reveal subtle variations. Its shape shifted, elongated slightly at times, rounded at others, with the thermal hotspots pulsing gently, almost rhythmically, as though breathing. The plumes acted as extensions of its presence, soft manifestations of activity that did not disrupt its trajectory, but enhanced the sense of deliberate motion. Each release was precise, each emission contained, almost ceremonial. The helicopter followed without haste, as if recognizing the grace in the unfolding pattern. The ocean below mirrored the sky in its own muted fashion. The surface rippled with gentle waves, catching the sunlight in fleeting sparks, while the clouds overhead drifted lazily, catching the edges of the heat in faint, silvery shimmers. There was no chaos, no turbulence. Instead, a quiet, unhurried orchestration of elemensa, scene that encouraged reflection and subtle awe. The plumes, the object, the sky, and the helicopter existed together in a delicate balance, like notes in a softly played melody. For the crew, time became a flexible companion. Each minute was long enough to observe, to measure, to wonder, yet brief enough to maintain focus on the ongoing flight. There was no rush, no urgent alarm, just the gentle insistence of curiosity and responsibility intertwined. They documented, they logged, they recorded, each observation like a brushstroke in a slowly unfolding portrait of the unknown. Attempts at communication remained fruitless. The object did not respond to radio, did not register on radar, and maintained its steady course, unmoved by human intervention. Yet this absence of interaction did not diminish its presence. On the contrary, the silence created space for reflection, for careful attention to the subtle details that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. In those quiet intervals, the object's plumes became almost a language of motion and heat, and the crew, the attentive listeners, deciphering meanings without words, interpreting gestures without sound. Even to wind the subtle currents of air across the helicopter's path seemed to play a role. The plumes drifted gently in response, bending with the invisible fingers of the atmosphere. Yet the object itself remained steady, resisting gusts as though guided by an internal sense of direction. This contrast between the soft responsiveness of the emissions and the controlled stability of the object created a sense of balance, a visual poetry that lingered in the minds of the observers long after the infrared glow had faded. As the encounter drew toward its final minutes, the second plume dissipated, leaving a faint, lingering signature that slowly blended into the background. The object maintained its trajectory, moving steadily until it reached the soft embrace of clouds along the horizon. At 14:01 UTC, it vanished from view, leaving the helicopter and its crew to absorb the quiet afterglow of observation. There was no sudden disappearance, no abrupt shift. It simply moved beyond sight, like a thought receding into memory, leaving the mind to reconstruct its presence from impressions and evidence. The flight back to base was filled with reflective silence. Every instrument had recorded data, every movement had been logged, every pulse of heat accounted for. Yet the human experience remained layered atop the empirical, a mixture of wonder, patience, and careful skepticism. The plumes, the heat, the rhythm, all of it became part of a narrative that extended beyond the moment, reaching into questions about perception, physics, and the nature of observation itself. By the time the helicopter landed, the encounter had already begun, its journey into investigation. The footage, the logs, the witness, reports all became part of a meticulous study. Experts would later analyze every detail: thermal gradients, plume dispersion, object rotation, and trajectory. Skeptics would attempt to replicate the patterns with aircraft and contrails. while Cepha would consider the possibility of truly anomalous movement. But at this moment, suspended in memory and infrared light, the plumes were alive in a way that no analysis could diminish. A quiet testament to the complexity of the sky and the subtle presence of something unexplained. In that interplay of light, heat, and motion, the object had left an impression not just on instruments, but on the human mind. It whispered possibilities without demanding conclusions, suggested patterns without offering answers, and invited patience as a form of understanding. The plumes were not merely visual phenomena, they were gestures, hints, delicate traces of presence that spoke to the need for careful observation, for curiosity tempered with reason, for attention to detail in the face of the unexplained. And so, as the sun rose higher over the Chilean coast, the object receded into the soft horizon, leaving a trail of questions as luminous and fleeting as the infrared plumes it had released. The sky returned to calm. The ocean remained steady. Yet the memory of movement, the glow of thermal energy, and the rhythm of those emissions lingered, an invisible echo that would guide the minds of those who sought to understand it for years to come. And as the plumes faded into memory, the story quietly deepened, hinting at mysteries still waiting to be unraveled. Chapter 5. Eyes on the Sky. The analysis begins. The morning air over Chile's central coast remained soft and luminous, as though the ocean and the sky were sharing a secret. The helicopter's rotors cut gently through the stillness, and the infrared camera recorded every subtle flicker of warmth and movement. But now, the encounter had passed, and a new chapter of quiet curiosity began. The analysis. What the eyes had seen in real time would soon meet the scrutiny of experience, discipline, and science. Back at the base, the crew handed over the enormous TS file over a gigabyte in size, containing 9 minutes of high-definition infrared video. Marcelo Nera, meticulous and precise, reviewed the playback repeatedly. Every frame held a world of detail, subtle shifts in brightness, tiny adjustments in the object's orientation, and the pulsing, expanding plumes that had captivated them in the sky. The footage, in its raw, untouched form, was now ready to tell its story to others experts who could interpret the invisible language of heat and movement. The first group to examine the data was SAFAR Chile's Committee for the Study of Anomalous Aerial Phenomena. Their approach was careful, almost ceremonial, reflecting years of experience, balancing skepticism with curiosity. Each analyst brought their own lens to the footage. The nuclear chemist Mario Avila, the astrophysicist Luis Barrera, and the photogrammetric analyst Alberto Vergara, among others. Together, they formed a mosaic of expertise, capable of reading a video not just as images, but as a story of motion, energy, and possibility. Avila began with the thermal signatures. He had seen countless infrared images in his career. Jets, helicopters, even experimental aircraft. But something about these plumes struck him as different. The heat did not behave like exhaust. It radiated outward with gentle symmetry, dissipating slowly, without falling or breaking apart. It seemed alive in its motion, guided by some force other than gravity. He noted the temperature peaks, the gradients, the way energy spread through space like soft ripples in water. Each observation was written down, meticulously measured, and compared to known sources of heat emission. Barrera, meanwhile, considered the context of the environment, the clouds, the air currents, and the broader atmospheric conditions. Clear skies and calm winds made the object visible at extraordinary distances. Temperature inversions and subtle shifts in humidity could create optical effects, even in infrared. But the behavior of the plumes suggested something more intentional, more structured. He drew parallels to orbital mechanics and fluid dynamics, considering the invisible forces that might subtly shape the object's trajectory and the movement of its ejections. Vergara took on the challenge of structure and motion. Using photogrammetric techniques, he analyzed the distance, size, and relative motion of the object. The infrared camera could exaggerate dimensions or flatten perspective, but his careful calculations suggested a three-dimensional form. The object was not a flat illusion, nor simply a distant aircraft. It had volume, orientation, and a presence that could not be ignored. Each rotation, each minor adjustment of its position was captured in precise data points, creating a digital skeleton of motion for others to study. Together, the team began to see patterns in the apparent chaos. The plumes were not random. They followed a rhythm, a repetition that hinted at control. First, a larger emission, then a smaller one, spaced apart just enough to establish balance. The brightness of the hotspots suggested rotation or internal energy, the object interacting with the surrounding air in a way that defied immediate explanation. Even the lack of a detectable propulsion system became part of the pattern. It was as if the object moved with confidence, unconcerned with the forces that would govern a conventional aircraft. The analysts approached the footage as detectives might approach a crime scene. Every detail mattered, from the soft edges of the thermal bloom to the way the object resisted wind currents. They logged observations meticulously: speed, altitude, trajectory, plume duration, and intensity. Each metric became a brushstroke in a larger painting, revealing a form of order behind the apparent mystery. They debated every subtle nuance, weighing the likelihood of conventional explanations against the possibility of something unknown. Despite the focus on precision, there was room for quiet awe. The plumes, the pulsing heat, the deliberate motion that carried a beauty that was almost meditative. Watching the infrared display, the team sometimes found themselves pausing, not because of fear, but because the patterns seemed to invite reflection. It was a reminder that curiosity was as much about observation as it was about answers. In the calm glow of the screens, they saw not just an object, but a challenge to perception itself. As the days passed, the Cepha team layered additional data onto the analysis. Radar records confirmed that the object had not been picked up by conventional systems. Flight logs were reviewed, air traffic control reports were cross-checked, and meteorological conditions were examined in minute detail. Birds and drones were eliminated. Early altitude, speed, and thermal signatures simply did not match anything known. Weather balloons and atmospheric phenomena were similarly dismissed. The object remained, in every measurable way, anomalous. Yet, the team did not rush to conclusions. Every observation was scrutinized, every possibility considered. Skepticism was not discarded. It was integrated into the process. Could a distant aircraft produce these effects? Could infrared anomalies, distance compression, or optical illusions account for the plumes and movement? The team tested each scenario, modeling the data against what was physically and technologically plausible. The answer, after repeated trials, continued to defy conventional explanation. Outside Chile, the story began to ripple quietly. Researchers and skeptics examined the publicly released footage after 2017, offering their own interpretations. Some proposed that commercial flights, especially long-haul jets at high altitude, could create infrared glows and contrail effects that mimic ejections. They ran simulations, adjusting for distance, angle, and atmospheric conditions, and in some cases, the patterns could be loosely reproduced. Yet even these reconstructions fell short of capturing the exact behavior of the plumes and the precise alignment of the objects. Movement with the helicopter. In this interplay between observation and skepticism, a delicate balance emerged. The Cepha analysts maintained that the object exhibited features consistent with an unidentified aerial phenomenon. Three-dimensional structure, controlled motion, energy ejections, and resistance to environmental forces. Skeptics acknowledged the ingenuity of the data modeling, yet pointed to potential misinterpretations inherent in infrared imagery and long-distance observation. Both sides were rooted in evidence, and both were limited by the technology and the scope of human perception. Amid this careful scrutiny, the human element remained central. The pilot recalled the precise moment of the first plume, the way it expanded like a quiet fire in the sky, neither threatening nor chaotic, but deliberate and mesmerizing. Marcella remembered the second plume, smaller yet equally vivid, and the rhythm it established in the unfolding scene. These personal impressions were as important as the raw data. They conveyed the subtle impact of witnessing something that challenged expectations, a gentle but persistent reminder that reality was often stranger than assumption. The team also considered the broader implications. If the object was truly unidentified, It suggested limitations in current monitoring systems. How many other phenomena might slip through unnoticed? Their presence only hinted at through subtle anomalies. Could the sky itself contain patterns and movements, invisible to casual observation, only revealed through patient, systematic attention? These questions were unspoken but felt, hovering in the quiet after each viewing session, echoing in the minds of those who had devoted themselves to understanding the encounter. Slowly, the story began to form, like sediment settling in a clear pool of water. Each plume, each infrared pulse, each calculated rotation contributed to a larger narrative. A moment of observation that refused to be simplified. A scene in the sky that carried both clarity and ambiguity, precision and mystery. It was a story without a tidy ending, but rich in detail, inviting patience and reflection. The analysis continued through weeks and months. Each metric was re-examined, each observation reconsidered, and yet the plumes remained stubbornly distinct and yet elusive. They were simple enough to describe glowing thermal releases expanding into the sky, but complex enough to defy easy categorization. And in that space between understanding and uncertainty, the object and its plumes took on an almost meditative presence, a reminder that some mysteries are not puzzles to be solved immediately, but experiences to be witnessed, measured, and respected. By the end of the initial Cepha study, a consensus formed around the importance of the plumes as a defining feature of the encounter. They were not merely visual artifacts. They were active participants in the scene, offering clues, suggesting behavior, and challenging assumptions about what was possible. Their gentle, glowing presence became emblematic of the encounter itself. Subtle, deliberate, and quietly remarkable. And so, the story of the plumes entered the growing narrative of Chile's UAP study. They became the thread that connected observation to analysis, curiosity to method, and the sky above to the minds below. They were the first hint that something in the ordinary sweep of patrols and surveillance could transcend expectation, that even the most routine flight could become a journey into wonder. In the end, the plumes were more than phenomena, they were invitations. They invited careful attention, thoughtful questioning, and the patient unfolding of understanding. They whispered that the sky held more than immediate answers, that perception was both a tool and a boundary, and that curiosity, when exercised with discipline, could open doors to experiences both profound and quietly transformative. The Cepha report would later summarize the encounter with scientific rigor, noting the plumes, the object's movement, and the lack of conventional explanation. But the human experience, the attentive observation, the quiet awe, the repeated reflection, remained an unquantifiable, yet essential, part of the story. In those moments, the plumes had done more than mark the sky they had drawn the observers into a deeper relationship with the unknown, teaching patience, humility, and the subtle art of noticing. And as the final notes of analysis were written, the plumes lingered in memory, soft and persistent, like embers fading in a darkened sky. They were traces of wonder, threads of mystery, and gentle reminders that the world above could surprise, challenge, and inspire, even in the calmest, most methodical moments of study. And so, with the plumes measured, the patterns logged, and the first steps of understanding taken, the story moved quietly into the next phase where skepticism, theory, and deeper reflection would begin to intertwine. Chapter 6. Shadows of Explanation. Skepticism emerges, even as the Chilean Navy and Cepha meticulously examined every pixel, every pulse of heat, and every calculated trajectory. The story of the object in the sky began to stretch beyond the walls of the base. Like a quiet breeze, whispers of analysis and interpretation drifted out to the wider world. Not all of it agreed with the wonder and intrigue felt by those who had witnessed the plumes firsthand. From afar, a different kind of attention began. Skeptical, methodical, and unflinchingly practical. Skeptics approached the case not as an opportunity to debunk, but as an invitation to understand. Their perspective was rooted in physics, engineering, and the careful study of optical and infrared phenomena. The Chilean footage, in all its high-definition, infrared glory, provided an ideal canvas for examination. Every glowing pulse, every ejection of thermal material, every rotation of the mysterious object became a point of inquiry, a clue in a complex puzzle of light, distance, and perception. Among the most vocal and meticulous skeptics was Mick West, a science writer and researcher with years of experience deconstructing unusual aerial sightings. He approached the footage with a calm patience, dissecting it frame by frame, asking the questions that a scientist asks when confronted with an unfamiliar observation. What do we know for certain? What can be measured? What is subject to illusion or misinterpretation? In these inquiries, there was no dismissiveness, only a quiet insistence on understanding through evidence. West and others began by considering one of the simplest explanations: commercial aircraft. At first glance, it seemed almost too mundane to consider. How could a massive object, glowing with heat, releasing plumes, and moving so deliberately, be mistaken for a distant jet? Yet, infrared cameras have peculiarities. Heat signatures stretch and blur across great distances. Engines, wings, and contrails can merge into singular shapes, creating illusions of volume and movement. Even a conventional flight, viewed under the right or wrong conditions, could appear extraordinary. They ran simulations, carefully reconstructing the flight paths of known aircraft in the area on the day of the incident. Iberia Flight IB 6830. An Airbus A340-300 became a focal point, using open-source flight tracking data, Google Earth reconstructions, and precise timing correlations with the video. The skeptics showed that a jet at high altitude could align nearly perfectly with the object's observed trajectory. Distance compressed the apparent size, while the infrared sensor exaggerated engine heat into bright hotspots. Contrails, formed under humid conditions, could mimic the plumes that had captured the helicopter crew's attention. The argument was subtle, almost gentle. It didn't claim the object was definitively a plane, only that it could be. Each simulation was carefully documented, showing how perspective, distance, and atmospheric conditions could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. The glowing, rotating spheres noted by the observers could, under certain optical conditions, be explained as merging engine glares. The apparent ejections of thermal material could be reproduced through the natural formation of contrails in specific layers of moist air. And yet, the skeptics acknowledged gaps, nuances in the timing, the size, and the behavior of the object that didn't fully align with known aircraft. This was the beauty of skeptical investigation. It forced the story to be measured in multiple ways. It required patient attention to the environment as well as the data. They examined every meteorological report, every wind current, every potential source of optical distortion. They consulted aviation experts to understand how jet engines might appear from extreme distances, how infrared systems interpret heat, and how pilots' own perspectives could influence what they reported. The process was exhaustive, quiet, and deeply respectful of the original witness's integrity. At the same time, skeptics were careful not to overstate their case. Unlike sensational headlines that promised aliens or advanced technology, their analysis was cautious, framed in probabilities and potentialities. They highlighted how perception, even through advanced sensors, could be deceived. Human vision and mechanical vision are different. The brain seeks patterns, shapes, and familiar forms. When the sensors detected heat, pulses far beyond everyday experience, the mind naturally searched for meaning. Sometimes, meaning is found where none was intended. The skeptics' findings began to ripple back to Cefa. Analysts like Mario Avila and Alberto Vergara watched these reconstructions with quiet curiosity. Some of the simulations were compelling, providing plausible explanations for portions of the video. Yet, certain behaviors remained puzzling. The precise timing of the plumes, the controlled movement of the object in relation to the helicopter, and the absence of radar signatures persisted as anomalies. Even the most careful skeptical reconstruction could not account for every detail. This interplay between skepticism and official analysis created a dynamic tension. Cefa's team remained grounded in evidence and observation, acknowledging the strange qualities of the encounter, while carefully ruling out conventional explanations. Skeptics, with equal rigor, explored every conceivable way the footage could be interpreted through known phenomena. Both approaches relied on data, logic, and disciplined reasoning. Both respected the original witnesses, and both encountered limitations, subtle blind spots in technology, and perception that made the object elusive. It was here that the narrative of uncertainty deepened, soft and persistent, like the coastal fog. The skeptic's approach did not diminish the experience. It made everything better by considering alternative explanations. They highlighted how delicate observation must be, how easily even trained eyes can interpret the extraordinary through familiar frameworks. And in doing so, they invited the original analysts, and indeed anyone who looked at the footage, to see their two-way possibilities carefully, and to embrace the tension between what is known and what is unknown. Some skeptics took the analysis further, creating infrared simulations in controlled environments. They placed small heat sources at great distances, observed them through similar FLIR cameras, and noted how the shapes expanded, merged, and shifted in the display. They introduced variables: wind, humidity, angles, and background temperature. Slowly, patterns emerged that resembled the Chilean footage in certain aspects. Not all. These exercises were illuminating, revealing the subtle complexities of infrared perception. They reminded everyone that seeing is never merely seeing. It is a negotiation between physical reality and sensory interpretation. Amid these reconstructions, the human aspect remained central. The helicopter crew's testimony, their care logs, and their drawings were not dismissed. They were treated as critical pieces of the puzzle. Skeptics acknowledged that the object's behavior had influenced perception and emotion. The plumes were mesmerizing. The alignment with the helicopter's path was uncanny, and the duration over 9 minutes was long, enough for attentive observation to become contemplative, almost meditative. This was not a fleeting impression. It was a sustained engagement with an anomaly, a shared experience that combined technology, environment, and human consciousness. Beyond the technical debate, the skeptic's engagement encouraged a quiet philosophical reflection. How often do our senses, trained or otherwise, meet conditions that challenge understanding? How many times have the ordinary been misread as extraordinary, or the extraordinary simplified into the ordinary? The Chilean case became a gentle mirror for broader questions about perception, about certainty, and about the delicate dance between observation and interpretation. It was a reminder that, even with advanced instruments, the world could surprise, puzzle, and challenge, and that the pursuit of clarity often required patience, humility, and open-mindedness. As the skeptics published their reconstructions and shared them with the broader scientific and analytical community, a subtle dialogue emerged. Sifa's reports, the eyewitness accounts, and the skeptical models began to form a layered understanding. No single explanation captured the entirety of the experience, but each contributed to a richer, more nuanced picture. The interaction between competing perspectives illuminated not just the object itself, but the processes of analysis, observation, and human reasoning. In the gentle back and forth, the story became as much about how we study the sky as about what occupies it. The Chilean Navy UFO footage, once a mysterious anomaly drifting across infrared screens, had become a touchstone for careful examination and interdisciplinary inquiry. The skeptic's simulations, while not definitive, provided context, revealing how environmental conditions, sensor limitations, and perspective could converge to create images that were compelling, enigmatic, and at times misleading. Yet the core mystery, the coordinated movement, the controlled ejections, the absence of radar detection remained, like a shadow that quietly resisted explanation. And so, the story rested in this balance between observation and interpretation, between experience and simulation, between mystery and understanding. The object in the sky was no longer just an anomaly, it was a lens through which analysts, skeptics, and witnesses alike could explore the delicate interplay of technology, perception, and the unknown. It was a gentle, persistent invitation to ask, to probe, and to wonder without urgency or fear. Through this careful tension, the Chilean Navy case grew in significance. It was no longer just a single sighting. It became a narrative about the process of seeing, the challenge of interpreting, and the patience required to engage with phenomena that do not conform neatly to expectations. The object, the plumes, the infrared pulses all, became symbols of this process, quiet markers in a sky that invite a reflection and meticulous study. In the end, the skeptic's approach did not diminish the encounter. Instead, it deepened it, by exploring alternative explanations, by simulating conditions, and by methodically analyzing every detail. They created a conversation that extended far beyond the initial 9 minutes of footage. The dialogue between wonder and caution, between observation and interpretation, became a living aspect of the story, reminding everyone that mysteries are rarely solved in a single glance, but revealed slowly, through patience, care, and attention to the quiet, persistent details that often matter most. And as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the central coast of Chile, the object itself, whatever it was, lingered in thought and memory, not as a threat, not as a spectacle, but as a gentle reminder. The sky contains layers of complexity, and every observer, no matter how trained, participates in the delicate dance of understanding, where perception, technology, and curiosity intertwine. And with skepticism now woven into the story, the narrative quietly prepares to explore how these debates shaped official conclusions and public discourse, leading toward broader reflections on transparency and uncertainty. Chapter 7. The Official Eye. The moment the Chilean Navy helicopter returned to base, the footage was more than just a recording. It was a puzzle, a quiet whisper from the sky demanding attention. Inside CEFA, the Committee for Anomalous Aerial Phenomena, the footage created a buzz, spreading excitement like ripples on calm water. It was an unusual case, yet not entirely unexpected. Chile had long cultivated a culture of observation and careful inquiry, a tradition built on years of discipline, where each report, whether mundane or strange, was treated with patience, precision, and respect. The committee, led at the time by General Ricardo Bermudez, was a team used to parsing the extraordinary with methodical calm. They approached the footage as both guardians of airspace safety and stewards of scientific integrity. Their mission was clear: to observe, document, and analyze without preconceptions. The object on the infrared screen was real, in the sense that it was recorded, its energy trace undeniable. Yet its nature remained elusive, a gentle enigma hovering between certainty and imagination. The first step was meticulous verification. CEFA analysts examined the helicopter essay flight logs, GPS coordinates, and the precise timestamps embedded in the video. Every frame, every movement, was cross-referenced against meteorological data, air traffic records, and satellite imagery. The goal was to establish the firm ground beneath the more ethereal questions: what, where, and when. They knew that without a solid foundation of data, the allure of speculation could easily drift into misjudgment. Next came the detailed technical review. Nuclear chemist Mario Vila and astrophysicist Luis Barrera scrutinized the thermal signatures captured by the Westcam MX-15 HD FLIR camera. They noted the object's unusual properties. It emitted heat in 2 distinct hotspots. He had lacked the continuous exhaust typical of conventional aircraft. Its motion resisted wind, currents, instead of being buffeted by them, as if guided by a hand unseen. Brightness fluctuated subtly, suggesting rotation or internal dynamics, while its shape shifted, sometimes elongated, sometimes rounded, a gentle, mesmerizing dance across the infrared display. Alberto Vergara, the photogrammetry expert, approached the footage with a meticulous eye. He reconstructed 3-dimensional models of the object, measured distances, and analyzed relative motion. His calculations confirmed that the object was not merely a visual illusion. It exhibited real, measurable movement and volume. He traced the paths of the thermal plumes, noting how they dispersed into the surrounding clouds without descending, a behavior inconsistent with known debris or contrails. Every detail reinforced the complexity of what the crew had witnessed, an object obeying neither simple physics nor conventional explanations, yet behaving in a way that could be observed, measured, and recorded. Throughout the investigation, CEFA maintained a calm, disciplined rhythm. 8 formal committee meetings were held, each a quiet choreography of discussion, review, and analysis. Radar data from the ground was compared, with the helicopter's onboard instruments, revealing a curious absence. No object appeared on conventional radar systems, not on the ground stations, not on the helicopter's radar, and not on satellite overlays. The object was visible, tangible, and yet invisible by the usual electronic measures. This paradox became a central thread in the investigation, a shadow that invited careful contemplation. SIFA also reached beyond Chilean borders, seeking insight from international experts. France's Guypen team offered their own perspective, suggesting a possible aircraft explanation. But they, too, were compelled to acknowledge the peculiarities. The lack of radar detection, the apparent energy ejections, and the precision of the object's movement defied simple categorization. Even when conventional hypotheses were entertained, the object retained an air of quiet defiance, a subtle reminder that observation alone did not always yield understanding. The committee's deliberations were methodical and patient. Every potential explanation was weighed. Drones were eliminated due to altitude and range limitations. Birds were ruled out, as thermal readings and speed exceeded biological capabilities. Meteorological phenomena were discounted after careful review of atmospheric data. Each elimination was recorded, each note carefully preserved, contributing to a growing body of evidence that balanced meticulous skepticism with open-minded curiosity. Throughout this process, SEFA emphasized transparency. Their approach was not to declare a conclusion precipitously, but to document uncertainty with integrity. Reports were detailed, describing the object's motion, thermal characteristics, and interaction with the environment. Witness accounts were preserved, alongside technical analyses, creating a multi-layered record that invited ongoing scrutiny. This attention to detail reflected a philosophy that respected both the data and the human experience behind it. The helicopter crew's 9 minutes of observation, the technician's precise thermal readings, and the pilot's steady narration of events. Within these quiet halls of investigation, the object in the infrared footage became more than a visual anomaly. It became a teacher. It illustrated the limits of current technology and perception, a gentle prompt to examine how sensors interpret heat, how distance compresses reality, and how subtle environmental factors influence observation. Each member of the committee, in their own discipline, found themselves learning not just about the object, but about the process of knowing itself. The investigation was a mirror held to the interplay of observation, inference, and scientific discipline. Months passed. Each layer of analysis revealed further nuance. Photogrammetric modeling suggested controlled movement, while thermal studies revealed inconsistencies with known aircraft behavior. The object's ejections, initially thought to resemble conventional exhaust or contrail formation, were too consistent and structured to fit those models neatly. These findings were carefully documented, framed not as claims of extraordinary origin, but as precise observations requiring explanation. When the investigation concluded in 2016, SIFA had reached a decision that was both simple and profound. The object remained unidentified. The label, UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, was chosen deliberately. It was not a declaration of extraterrestrial visitation, nor a dismissal as misperception. It was a statement of careful, disciplined observation. Here's something we cannot explain, but we have documented it fully, honestly, and transparently. In January 2017, Chile released the footage to the public. For many, this was a quiet revolution. Few governments had ever shared such raw, detailed data, complete with analyses and reports. The footage circulated widely, bringing international attention to a case previously confined to the halls of SEFA. It sparked discussions in scientific communities, in aviation circles, and even in casual conversations. The transparency demonstrated that uncertainty was not weakness, but an opportunity to invite dialogue, reflection, and further inquiry. The release of the footage also highlighted a profound principle. Curiosity, when paired with disciplined investigation, does not demand immediate answers. It embraces the unknown, documents it carefully, and allows both experts and the public to engage with the mystery responsibly. SIFA's approach was quiet, meticulous, and respectful, creating a standard for how anomalous phenomena could be handled without sensationalism or fear. As the years unfolded, the Chilean case continued to echo. Analysts revisited the footage, skeptics produced new simulations, and the conversation about UAPs grew globally. The incident became a reference point, a benchmark for transparency, and a reminder that sometimes the act of observing and documenting is as important as understanding. The 9 minutes of infrared footage, the steady gaze of the helicopter crew, and the measured analysis of Cepha created a tapestry of inquiry that continues to inspire those who study the skies. Within this calm, deliberate investigation, the object itself retains a subtle magic. It moves like a shadow between certainty and uncertainty, a gentle prompt to question assumptions and explore possibilities. It reminds observers that the world is complex, that data can guide but not always resolve, and that careful attention, patience, and respect for both evidence and witness are the hallmarks of meaningful discovery. And as the sun dipped beyond the horizon, casting soft golden light over the central Chilean coast, the object remained in the minds of those who studied it, not as a threat, not as a spectacle, but as an enduring invitation to watch, to measure, and to wonder without hurry. Cepha's investigation was not an ending, but a lens magnifying the subtle dance between observation and interpretation, between the known and the unknown. It was a testament to patience, rigor, and the quiet power of curiosity guided by discipline. In this chapter, the narrative lingers in the quiet halls of Cepha, where technology, observation, and human intellect intersect. It is a chapter not of resolution, but of measured engagement, a reminder that understanding is a slow unfolding, that mysteries are sometimes best honored through careful study, and that the gentle act of investigation can illuminate as much as any conclusion. And so, with the official investigation complete, the story is ready to shift outward, exploring the broader implications, public reception, and how this carefully documented mystery shaped both debate and imagination. Chapter 8. Ripples in the Sky. The moment Chile released the footage to the public in January 2017, it was as though a quiet stone had been dropped into a still pond, sending concentric ripples across the world. Unlike the explosive headlines that often accompany mysterious phenomena, this release was deliberate, measured, and calm. Cepha provided not just the video, but detailed reports, witness statements, and technical analysis. It was a gesture of transparency, an invitation to look closely and think carefully, rather than jump to fear or fantasy. The ripples started subtly, first among aviation enthusiasts, then in scientific circles, and eventually reaching broader public consciousness. Newsrooms across the world faced a curious balance. They had a story that could have been sensational, yet the material itself was understated. A helicopter flying over Chile, a thermal camera capturing an unidentified object, no dramatic explosions, no sudden appearances, just 9 minutes of infrared footage, silent yet insistently strange. And yet, the footage was hypnotic. It pulled viewers into its quiet rhythm, each frame encouraging questions. What is this? How could it move so? Why can't radar see it? In households around Santiago and beyond, people watched with a blend of curiosity and mild unease. Pilots and air traffic controllers shared the footage among colleagues, discussing subtle aspects others might miss. The way the object maintained altitude, the precise timing of the thermal ejections, the calm, steady flight path of the helicopter. For professionals who spent their lives navigating the skies, these were not ordinary anomalies. Even a small inconsistency could indicate risk. And here, the object defied ordinary explanations with a patient, measured movement that seemed almost intentional. The international response was just as quiet, yet persistent. Scientific journals, typically hesitant to engage with unverified anomalies, published cautious analyses. Experts noted the credibility of Cepha, the rigor of the investigation, and the professionalism of the witnesses. Here was a case that couldn't be dismissed as amateur sightings or blurry phone footage. It had been studied with care, recorded with precision, and documented with integrity. For many in the scientific community, the case became a benchmark, a model for how governments could responsibly release anomalous information without the drama. Media outlets, from Chile to the United States, approached the story differently. Some framed it as a mysterious object, others as a technological curiosity, and a few highlighted the rigorous methodology behind the investigation. Headlines varied, but the essence was consistent. A reliable, professional body had documented an object in the sky. That remained unexplained. Social media amplified these perspectives, creating spaces where enthusiasts, skeptics, and experts could exchange ideas. Threads examined individual frames, paused the video at thermal ejections, debated the possible speeds, the environmental conditions, and the very nature of the infrared recordings. What set the Chilean case apart from many other UFO stories was credibility. It wasn't just the helicopter crew's report, it was the layers of verification. Flight logs, GPS coordinates, meteorological records, radar comparisons, and independent photogrammetric analysis all contributed to a data set that encouraged critical examination. Safa's methodology was laid bare, allowing anyone willing to study it, to trace each step, to see where hypotheses were tested and eliminated. This transparency nurtured trust and curiosity simultaneously. People didn't have to believe in aliens. They only had to acknowledge that something unusual had occurred and had been documented carefully. In the months that followed, discussions unfolded in academic forums, aviation meetings, and online communities. Some voices leaned toward conventional explanations. Commercial flight paths, engine glare, contrail formations, and atmospheric distortions were proposed as possibilities. Others, emphasizing the thermal ejections and absence of radar signatures, suggested the object resisted standard classifications. In every conversation, the calm rhythm of the footage invited reflection rather than panic. It was a gentle but insistent reminder that observation could challenge expectation without demanding immediate answers. For pilots and aviation experts, the case sparked new considerations about airspace safety. The object's altitude, its timing along busy flight corridors, and the way it interacted or didn't with radar systems highlighted gaps in monitoring. It became a case study in the potential risks of unidentified aerial objects. In controlled airspace, training programs incorporated discussions about sensor limitations, distance perception, and the subtle ways that environmental factors could alter observation. The event prompted questions that were as much about human cognition as about technology. How do we interpret what we see, and how reliable are our instruments under unusual conditions? Families of the crew, quietly proud, reflected on the professionalism of their loved ones. The helicopter pilot and FLIR technician had done exactly what they were trained to do: observe, document, and report. They did not embellish. They did not panic. Instead, they provided a calm, steady record that became the foundation of international discussion. In an age where rumors and misinformation spread faster than facts, their measured response created a touchstone for truthfulness and integrity. The broader cultural impact was equally subtle. In schools and universities, the story was used to spark curiosity in young minds. It encouraged students to ask questions, to think critically, and to examine data carefully. It demonstrated that mystery could coexist with science, that the unknown was not a threat, but an invitation to observe and learn. Libraries, science clubs, and aviation societies kept the footage on file, revisiting it periodically as a gentle reminder that the world still held surprises, even above familiar cities and familiar oceans. Even skeptics, while questioning the origins of the object, acknowledged the professionalism of the report. Mick West and other analysts published detailed reconstructions, offering alternative interpretations. They modeled commercial flights, infrared effects, and atmospheric influences, suggesting that what seemed anomalous could have a conventional source. Yet the discussion remained respectful, focused on analysis rather than dismissal. The dialogue between official investigators, skeptics, and the public became a quiet ecosystem of learning, where curiosity and caution coexisted. Social media, particularly platforms like X, transformed the narrative from local curiosity to global phenomenon. Clips circulated with careful captions, sparking debates across continents. Enthusiasts pointed to similarities with other UAP encounters, connecting dots between Chile, the United States, and Europe. Analysts traced flight paths, weather conditions, and sensor calibrations, often referencing SAFA's original reports. Each new post, comment, or thread added a layer of collective observation, a digital chorus quietly amplifying the story without ever forcing conclusions. In 2025, the Chilean footage experienced a renaissance. New sightings off the coast, similar in shape and behavior, reignited interest. Analysts revisited the original 9-minute video, comparing patterns, speeds, and thermal signatures. The case remained unresolved, yet the continued study highlighted the enduring value of methodical observation. People were drawn back, not because answers had been found, but because questions remained, framed carefully by data and professional analysis. Through all these ripples to international coverage, the academic discussions, the social media chatter, one subtle lesson emerged. Mystery does not demand panic. It invites attention. Observation does not require belief in the extraordinary. It requires respect for what is documented. The Chilean Navy incident and SIFA scum transparency created a gentle but profound shift in public consciousness. People learned to watch closely, to question, and to consider possibilities without fear or without going overboard. As the sun dipped behind the Andes and the Pacific reflected a tranquil evening glow, the story settled into a quiet rhythm. The helicopter crew, the investigators, the analysts, and the public all shared a common experience. A measured encounter with the unknown, framed not by spectacle, but by observation and thought. It was a reminder that curiosity, patience, and careful documentation could transform fleeting moments into enduring stories. In this chapter, the focus lingers not on resolution, but on the gentle, persistent influence of truth, shared responsibly. The public reaction, far from chaotic, was contemplative, reflective, and inquisitive. And as conversation spread across the globe, the Chilean UAP case remained a subtle beacon, a quiet glowing reminder that mystery and method could coexist, and that the act of looking closely, documenting carefully, and questioning gently was a form of discovery in itself. It was a chapter of ripples, of quiet influence that extended far beyond the initial 9 minutes of infrared footage, and it was an invitation, softly whispered, to continue watching, questioning, and imagining, always with calm attentiveness and measured curiosity. From these ripples in the public sphere, we now turn to the waves they created, the debates, the skepticism, and the broader implications that stretch beyond Chile's skies. Chapter 9. Through the lens of skepticism, the quiet ripples of public attention soon met the gentle, probing waves of skepticism. While the footage captivated the imagination, it also invited questions that demanded precision, logic, and careful reasoning. Skeptics approached the Chilean Navy incident not to diminish it, but to explore it through lenses grounded in physics, aviation, and human perception. Their methods were deliberate, their observations meticulous, and their conclusions, though sometimes contentious, contributed a layer of reflection that enriched the story rather than contradicted it. In laboratories, offices, and even at kitchen tables around the world, analysts reconstructed the scene. They asked themselves, softly, almost rhetorically, could this object really be something entirely unknown? Or was it something familiar, revealed in an unfamiliar light? The infrared camera, after all, does not see color, shape, or texture in the way human eyes do. It reads heat, translating warmth into glowing images against a cooler backdrop. And heat, as it turns out, can be deceptive. One of the earliest proposals suggested that the object might have been a commercial aircraft, Iberia flight IB-60-830. An Airbus, a 340-300, was on its scheduled route at high altitude. Skeptics noted that, from a distance of 35 to 40 miles, engine heat and fuselage reflections could merge on infrared into what appeared to be a single, elongated object. The two distinct thermal hotspots, previously described as white eyes or semi-oval glimmers, could correspond to the aircraft's engines, amplified and reshaped by the camera's sensitivity. Even the plume ejections, so startling in the original footage, might be explained as aerodynamic contrails forming under specific temperature and humidity conditions at high altitudes, momentarily appearing as glowing clouds. To test this hypothesis, independent researchers employed Google Earth reconstructions, flight tracking databases like PlanFender, and infrared simulation software. They overlaid the flight paths of known aircraft on the recorded trajectory, matching timestamps with the helicopter's GPS logs. In Mani frames, the alignment was striking. A distant plane, seen through the FLIR camera, could indeed appear larger, elongated, and even divided into separate thermal spots due to perspective and optical artifacts. The camera, in effect, magnified small discrepancies into visual anomalies. Another layer of investigation focused on environmental influences. The Pacific Ocean beneath the helicopter, the Humboldt Current swirling softly, and the clear skies created unique conditions for infrared reflection. Slight variations in air temperature and humidity could distort perceived motion. Hot air rising from the ocean or heat, reflected from cloud edges, might subtly shift the apparent shape of the object. Even the wind at the helicopter's altitude, though mild, could introduce micro-movements that, on a thermal display, mimic deliberate flight patterns. Observers found themselves asking, almost whispering, how many things in our skies are shaped by perception as much as by reality? The skeptics' work was painstaking. Every detail of the video, every flicker of thermal brightness, every minor shift in trajectory was scrutinized. Experiments were conducted with drones and scale models under infrared cameras to understand how distance, angle, and environmental conditions could create illusions. Contrails was studied at varying altitudes and temperatures, and engine heat was recorded from multiple perspectives. In these exercises, the team discovered that two planes crossing the same corridor within minutes of each other could appear as a single object on infrared video, an elongated shape with apparent ejections. Perspective, timing, and thermal blending combined to create a visual narrative that seemed anomalous, yet was rooted in known physics. But skepticism was not a uniform chorus. Even among critical analysts, some aspects remained puzzling. The object's apparent resistance to wind, its smooth acceleration and deceleration, and the lack of radar detection could not be fully explained by commercial aircraft. The helicopter's precise path, the consistent thermal signature, and the pattern of ejections still invited questions. Skeptics acknowledged that while misidentification could account for much, there were elements that remained intriguing, subtle, and worth noting. Here, the calm beauty of curiosity persisted, even within the rigor of critical analysis. Interestingly, this duality mirrored the broader experience of the incident itself. On one side, CIFA investigators, relying on structured elimination and expert consensus, concluded that the object was a UAP, unidentified, despite careful scrutiny. On the other, skeptics demonstrated that familiar elements explains contrails. Infrared artifacts could account for much of what was seen. Both perspectives were grounded in observation and method, yet neither provided absolute certainty. The tension between them was quiet, almost meditative, inviting those who listened closely to dwell in the space between mystery and explanation. Throughout these examinations, human perception was a recurring theme. The camera could be precise, but human eyes, even when guided by instruments, are influenced by expectation and context. The crew in the helicopter, experienced and trained, still interpreted shapes in ways influenced by distance, atmospheric distortion, and attention. Skeptics emphasized this point gently. The sky offers countless cues, but they can be read in multiple ways, each plausible, each compelling. The lesson, whispered softly among analysts, was that observation requires humility. What we see is filtered through tools, minds, and assumptions, and even a 9-minute video can contain multiple truths depending on perspective. Simulations became an essential tool. Drones and small aircraft were flown in conditions mimicking the 2014 day. The same altitude, temperature, and humidity, filmed through high-resolution FLIR cameras. Researchers noted patterns. Thermal blobs merged or split. Elongated shapes flickered in ways that suggested movement, and plumes of condensation resembled energy ejections. In these careful, deliberate reconstructions, the Chilean footage found echoes in mundane phenomena. Yet these echoes never fully erased the original anomaly. The mystery retained its shape, soft but persistent, like a stone resting in the center of a still pond. Throughout, skepticism maintained a tone of quiet inquiry rather than dismissal. The goal was understanding, not ridicule. Analysts encouraged open dialogue, contrasting each observation with known aviation and environmental effects, weighing probabilities without declaring absolute conclusions. They noted the value of the original CEFAA documentation, the integrity of the witnesses, and the precision of the video recording. Skepticism, in this context, became a form of respect. Respect for evidence, for procedure, and for the subtle complexity of perception. The debates also highlighted broader implications for technology and observation. Senses, no matter how advanced, interact with the environment in ways that can both reveal and obscure. Infrared cameras measure heat, not mass. They translate energy into imagery that humans then interpret. Small errors in calibration, subtle differences in angle, and minor environmental fluctuations can transform ordinary events into seemingly extraordinary ones. Analysts whispered about the limitations of instruments, reminding listeners that even professional-grade equipment produces images that must be read thoughtfully, patiently, and critically. By the time discussions reached online forums, classrooms, and professional conferences, the Chilean case had become a quiet benchmark for UAP analysis. It was not a story of panic or sensationalism, but one of observation, method, and reflection. It encouraged communities of interest, scientists, pilots, and enthusiasts alike to consider not only what they were seeing, but how they were seeing it. And in that space, curiosity thrived. Not fear, not certainty, but the gentle, sustained engagement with the unknown. As the sun slowly set over the Andes, painting the sky with dusky lavender and soft amber, the story of skepticism in this incident settled into a gentle rhythm. Analysts, watchers, and commentators alike recognized the beauty of a question held in balance, to acknowledge what is observable while embracing what remains uncertain. The object in the sky, the thermal pulses, the 9 minutes of infrared footage, they all became part of a quiet meditation on perception, evidence, and the limits of human understanding. In this chapter, the viewer learns not only about the object, but about the act of seeing itself. Skepticism becomes a lens not of denial, but of attentiveness. It asks, softly, how does the mind interact with instruments? How does distance reshape reality? How does curiosity persist when answers remain elusive? And in doing so, it prepares the mind for the next layer of understanding. The broader scientific implications and what these measured observations might mean for our future interactions with the unknown. Skepticism, in this gentle cadence, is not a closure. It is an invitation to explore, to question, to observe with care. And it sets the stage for considering what the Chilean UAP reveals not only about the sky, but about ourselves, our reliance on perception, our trust in technology, and our capacity for wonder tempered with patience. And as the questions linger softly in the mind, we turn toward the heart of the story, the scientific and technological implications, and what these quiet anomalies reveal about the possibilities hidden in our skies. Chapter 10. When physics whispers, there is a peculiar quiet that falls over the sky when it refuses to conform to our expectations. A silence that isn't empty, but loaded with questions, hints, and subtle disturbances in the rhythm of observation. That was the sky over Chile in November 2014, ordinary. At first glance, yet quietly challenging the assumptions of every instrument and every mind tuned to it. As we step into the realm of science and technology, we follow those subtle disturbances, listening to the whispers of physics itself. To the casual observer, the footage might seem straightforward, a glowing object moving across the horizon, captured by a sophisticated infrared camera. But the sophistication of the camera is precisely what turns observation into a gentle puzzle. The Westcam MX-15 HD FLIR camera does not see with human eyes. It perceives energy, mapping heat into visible tones that translate warmth into visual signals. What looks like brightness, sometimes pulsating or splitting, is the language of temperature, interpreted by technology and filtered through human perception. And in that language, anomalies appear small, subtle, and insistently intriguing. From the first moment the crew detected the object, analysts noticed behaviors that challenged conventional physics. There was movement without discernible propulsion. The object glided, maintained speed, resisted wind, and changed course with fluidity that would demand extraordinary explanation in any known aircraft. Infrared imagery revealed ejections of material brief, glowing plumes that expanded outward but did not fall in the gravitational manner we expect. These were not ordinary contrails. They had no predictable trajectory, no exhaust trail, and no drag-induced descent. The deeper one studies these nuances, the more the tension between expectation and observation becomes a soft meditation. Each frame of infrared video is a brushstroke, a quiet conversation between what is there, what is perceived, and what is interpreted. Nuclear chemists like Mario Avila examined the thermal emissions, noting their intensity and behavior. Photogrammetrists such as Alberto Vergara measured apparent motion and volume, confirming that the object appeared to exist in 3 dimensions, not as a flat or distorted image. Together, these experts whispered a conclusion that, while careful, carried profound implications. The object defied certain expectations of known physics. Yet science is never satisfied with what merely looks unusual. It asks why, how, and to what extent. Analysts compared the object's behavior with the 5 observables outlined later in U.S. military encounters. Low observability, absence of visible propulsion, sustained movement, resistance to environmental forces, and anomalous thermal patterns. The Chilean object exhibited one, then another, then several of these observables in sequence. The subtle pulsing, the gentle yet deliberate trajectory, and the thermal signatures combined to form a puzzle that felt more like a quiet meditation than a frantic alert. It is important to imagine how this looked through the pilot's eyes. Sitting in the cockpit of a helicopter, gliding over the deep blue expanse of the Pacific, sunlight reflecting off the gentle wave crests, there appears a distant glow on a high-definition infrared monitor. At first, it is small, almost easy to dismiss. But then, with every passing second, the glow moves in synchrony with the aircraft, releases heat plumes, and reacts in ways that seem deliberate, almost intelligent in their fluidity. The mind, trained to notice patterns and anomalies, cannot help but whisper, "What is this?" And that whisper, amplified by expert instruments, reaches into the domain of science, compelling it to bend, stretch, and examine the limits of understanding. Technologists then look to the instruments themselves, questioning their precision, calibration, and limitations. Infrared sensors, though advanced, are not infallible. They are subject to atmospheric distortion, reflection, and thermal bloom, which can exaggerate or reshape distant heat sources. Wind patterns, humidity, and air density can subtly alter the appearance of objects in ways invisible to the naked eye. When engineers reconstructed similar scenarios using drones, planes, and experimental setups, they discovered that even mundane aircraft could mimic some of the thermal patterns seen in the footage, but never perfectly. There remained something in the subtle fluidity, the timing, and the apparent awareness of movement that invited deeper thought. Some physicists asked whether unknown propulsion systems might explain the observations. Could there be technologies that manipulate air, energy, or fields in ways beyond our current knowledge? Could controlled movement occur without visible exhaust or drag? These questions were offered not as claims, but as contemplations, gentle thought, experiments probing the edge of understanding. In this gentle questioning, the sky itself became a teacher, offering lessons about humility, observation, and the boundaries of human perception. Others remained more grounded. They considered atmospheric artifacts, optical illusions, and instrument limitations. Could the apparent resistance to wind be a misinterpretation caused by the helicopter's relative motion? Could thermal pulses be reflections of humidity layers or minor turbulence? Even here, the answer was not abrupt or dramatic. The puzzle required patience, meticulous reconstruction, and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. In this sense, the Chilean incident became a classroom of calm observation, where each data point was a quiet conversation rather than a shout of revelation. The comparisons to other military encounters, such as the 2004 U.S. Navy Tic Tac incidents, depend the discussion. Though the locations, vehicles, and personnel differed, patterns emerged. Smooth, elongated objects, limited radar detection, subtle, fluid movements, and sightings captured primarily through advanced sensors rather than naked vision. Scientists and analysts noticed that these similarities hinted at either recurring physical phenomena or persistent gaps in observational technology. The sky, in its serene expansiveness, seemed to invite a continuous dialogue between observer and observed, challenge and comprehension, certainty and curiosity. One particularly illuminating aspect involved the concept of low observability. The Chilean object exhibited characteristics that made it nearly invisible to conventional radar. While still registering clearly on infrared, this phenomenon prompted conversations about sensor fusion integrating radar, infrared, and other detection systems to gain a fuller picture. Analysts whispered about future possibilities. Networks of sensors working in harmony, subtle anomalies flagged, patterns logged, and unknowns catalogued. The discussion was as much about preparing the mind and instruments for the unknown as it was about explaining the past. Infrared analysis also revealed questions about energy behavior. The plumes and glow did not behave like traditional exhaust or combustion products. Energy seemed to dissipate, diffuse, and interact with the environment in unpredictable ways. Could this indicate a natural phenomenon we have yet to fully understand, or a human-made technology that operates beyond conventional comprehension? Each possibility remains soft and speculative, a gentle nudge toward the wonder of inquiry rather than a claim of revelation. By now, the sky over Chile had taken on the role of a quiet narrator. Through instruments and data, it spoke in subtle rhythms. Here is a Chloe. Here's a question. Here is a boundary of understanding. Scientists learned to listen patiently, to track small variations, to reconstruct scenes with care. And in this calm attentiveness, the incident became more than a record of an unexplained object. It became a meditation on the nature of observation, the fragility of certainty, and the richness of curiosity pursued with rigor. Analysts also reflected on human factors. Even trained observers are subject to interpretation biases, and instruments, while precise, require careful calibration and understanding. Every assumption, no matter how slight, could tilt conclusions. The 9 minutes of footage became a study not only in physics but in the interaction of technology, perception, and the mind's instinct to seek patterns. In this way, the Chilean incident serves as a mirror. It reflects not just the sky above, but the way humans engage with the unknown, measuring, hypothesizing, and learning in gentle cycles. As night fell over Santiago, the Andes, casting soft shadows on the horizon, the Chilean case lingered in the consciousness of the global community. Scientists, engineers, skeptics, and enthusiasts alike revisited the footage with care, replaying sequences, analyzing thermal pulses, and imagining possibilities. The questions remained unanswered, yet the act of inquiry itself offered a quiet satisfaction, a meditative rhythm of curiosity that does not rush, but observes patiently, steadily, reverently. In essence, the Chilean Navy incident in 2014 was never merely about an object in the sky. It was about the conversation between human curiosity and the natural world, between instruments and imagination, between observation and interpretation. Every thermal pulse, every movement, every ejection of heat became a note in a symphony of inquiry. The sky whispered softly to those who watched carefully, asking, "What can you know? What can you trust? And how will you approach the subtle mysteries that surround you, always present, often elusive, yet endlessly compelling?" In this chapter, we see that science does not always provide closure. Sometimes, it offers a lens through which the unknown becomes a gentle meditational call to notice, to measure, to reflect. And sometimes, that is more valuable than certainty itself. And as the instruments rest and the night deepens, we turn toward the human side once again, decisions, processes, and the institutions that took this quiet mystery seriously. Chapter 11. The Guardians of the Sky. The sky had spoken, the instruments had recorded, the data whispered questions that refused to settle. But questions alone cannot act. For every anomaly, every faint glimmer on a high-definition screen. There are human hands, trained and disciplined, prepared to interpret, record, and weigh meaning against consequence. And in Chile, in that quiet, clear November sky of 2014, whose hands belonged to people who had long understood that the unknown could matter as much as the known. The moment the helicopter returned to base, there was no rush, no dramatics, just a sequence of careful, deliberate steps. The footage, 9 minutes of glowing infrared patterns against the vast Pacific backdrop, was transferred, catalogued, and logged. In those minutes, technicians checked time codes, calibrations, and temperature readings. Every frame was a point of inquiry, a small invitation to wonder without panic. At the heart of the response was CEFA, Chile's Committee for the Study of Anomalous Aerial Phenomena. It had been established decades earlier, not to chase fantastical ideas, but to ensure that airspace remained safe, and that pilots and civilians could trust the skies. Over the years, CEFA had grown into a quiet guardian, a meticulous observer of strange blips and unexplained lights, relying on process, expertise, and a steady rhythm of analysis. Leading this chapter of observation was General Ricardo Bermudez. His office was not one of flamboyant displays or rapid decisions, but of patience and disciplined curiosity. When asked about the footage later, he would offer only what he knew with certainty. "We do not know what it was." These words were not an admission of defeat, but a careful, deliberate acknowledgement of limsa rare, declaration of honesty in a world often eager for explanation. Within CEFA, a small but powerful team of experts convened. There was Mario Avila, a nuclear chemist with an eye for subtle thermal variations and energy emissions. He could read the faintest pulse of heat, as if it were a language, noting nuances invisible to ordinary instruments. Luis Barrera, an astrophysicist, considered the interaction of objects with atmospheric and orbital phenomena, ensuring that no celestial or meteorological explanations were overlooked. Alberto Vergara, a photogrammetrist, measured distances, velocities, and dimensions with painstaking precision, translating flickering infrared signatures into geometric insight. Each expert brought a different lens, yet they shared the same commitment: to observe without bias, to analyze without rush. Their process unfolded like a careful dance. First, the raw footage was examined frame by frame, noting the moments of emission, changes in shape, and apparent motion. Thermal readings were recorded, compared, and contextualized against environmental conditions, humidity, and temperature gradients. Witness statements were reviewed alongside the video, ensuring that the perceptions of those in the helicopter were preserved without alteration. Every assumption was questioned. Could the object have been a bird? A balloon? A distant aircraft, misperceived through infrared? Each hypothesis was gently considered, then tested against the data. Ground radar and satellite records were scrutinized. Nothing aligned. No conventional aircraft. No atmospheric anomaly. No natural occurrence corresponded with the 9-minute observation. The silence in these systems was as significant as the data itself. A glow appeared where no signal should have existed, a presence both obvious and undetectable. It was a paradox that invited reflection rather than alarm. Beyond Chile, the case quietly attracted international attention. Gaipen, France's official UAP research group, offered insights. Their perspective leaned cautiously toward conventional explanation, perhaps. A distant aircraft, but even they noted inconsistencies. The lack of radar, the thermal behaviors, the apparent energy ejections, all suggested something that could not be fully explained by existing records. CFA did not dismiss these views. Instead, it incorporated them into the wider tapestry of analysis, demonstrating a rare commitment to thoroughness over certainty. The skeptics arrived next. Figures like Mick West, known for careful and methodical examination, revisited the footage, often simulating scenarios with infrared physics models and reconstructed flight paths. Their work was not intended to discredit, but to illuminate. By comparing the object's trajectory with commercial flights, analyzing potential visual distortions, and considering contrail formations at high altitudes, they presented plausible alternatives. Yet even in their reconstructions, gaps persisted: subtle details in timing, motion, and thermal behavior that did not perfectly align with known aircraft. Through all this, CIFA maintained a dual-track approach, rigorous internal investigation, paired with openness to external expertise. Committee meetings were deliberate, 8 sessions spaced over months, each session blending technical review with discussion, questions, and critical thinking. Hypotheses were tested, assumptions scrutinized, and each conclusion was tentative until fully substantiated. Nothing was dismissed lightly. Birds were ruled out. Drones, at that distance and altitude, were impossible. Where the phenomena failed to match observed conditions, each elimination reinforced the weight of the remaining unknown. This methodical diligence extended to documentation. Every detail was recorded. Flight logs, GPS, timestamps, camera metadata, meteorological reports, witness statements, drawings made by the technician, Marcelo Nera, depicting the flat, elongated shape with 2 bright thermal points, were archived alongside numeric data. Each piece became part of a mosaic, a careful map of observation, reconstruction, and analysis. In these archives, the story of the event was preserved with a reverence that mirrored the quiet vastness of the sky itself. One of the most subtle yet profound aspects of the investigation was its restraint. CIFA did not sensationalize, nor did it speculate about extraterrestrial origins. Instead, it maintained a serene rigor, recognizing that the value of the investigation lay in clarity, transparency, and honesty. By January 2017, the footage and supporting documentation were publicly declassified. The announcement was simple, understated. We do not know what this object is, but here's all the data we have. There was no dramatization, no urgent call to mystery, just a careful presentation of evidence. The impact of this transparency rippled gently but persistently across the world. For other nations, it demonstrated a way to handle unexplained aerial phenomena without ridicule or suppression. It encouraged pilots, military personnel, and civilians to report observations, knowing that they would be taken seriously and recorded with precision. It also highlighted the necessity of methodical investigation, that uncertainty, when managed carefully, can be more informative than premature explanation. Within Chile, the case became a benchmark. It reinforced CIFA's role as a guardian of the skies and as a steward of integrity and observation. The quiet patience of experts like Bermudez, Avila Barrera, and Vergara set a precedent for how to approach the unknown. With rigor, with openness, and with humility. Even skeptics, who questioned certain interpretations, contributed to this calm ecosystem of analysis, proving that inquiry benefits from multiple perspectives. And yet, despite all the careful steps, all the documentation, and all the expertise, the incident retained its soft, persistent mystery. The object was seen, measured, and analyzed, but it remained unexplained. It floated in a gentle liminal space between data and speculation, observation and imagination. That was its quiet power. The investigation did not close the door. It held it open just enough for curiosity to linger, for questions to remain alive, and for science to continue its gentle, patient exploration. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies not in the object itself, but in the process. Here, in the careful cataloging of moments, the respectful consideration of multiple explanations, and the transparent release of information, we see the human side of engagement with the unknown. The calm diligence, the methodical examination, the commitment to integrity. They remind us that curiosity does not require certainty, and that knowledge can coexist with mystery. As the months turned to years, the 2014 Chilean incident became a quiet legend in scientific communities. It appeared in discussions alongside other military UAP encounters, not as a source of alarm, but as an example of what careful attention, calm observation, can reveal. Its value lay not in dramatic conclusions, but in the demonstration of patience, humility, and intellectual openness, a model for anyone attempting to understand phenomena that defy immediate explanation. In this chapter, we witness how human institutions, structured yet adaptable, can embrace the unknown without fear. CIFA and its network of experts remind us that even in the presence of uncertainty, careful observation, disciplined methodology, and transparent reporting create a space where knowledge grows, and where mystery remains a source of inspiration rather than alarm. And so, as the Chilean skies continue to hold secrets in their vast expanse, The guardians of the sky, those steady, watchful humans in their instruments, stand ready. They watch, they measure, they record, and they whisper to the next generation of observers. Look carefully, think deeply, and never fear the questions that arise when the world refuses to conform entirely to expectation. And as the institutional guardians close their files for the day, the story returns to the observers themselves, those who first glimpsed the luminous enigma and who carried its memory through every measured step of inquiry. Chapter 12. Ripples beyond the horizon. When an object appears in the sky, it does more than occupy space. It stretches imagination, sparks questions, and invites dialogue not just among those who saw it, but among everyone who tries to understand what lies beyond ordinary perception. The Chilean Navy incident of 214 was no different. Its subtle glow on infrared screens became a mirror, reflecting our own curiosity, our assumptions, and the careful balance between belief and skepticism. By the time the footage was released publicly in 2017, the case had already traveled far beyond Chile's borders. Safa's meticulous work, combined with the simple, profound statement, "We do not know what this object is, but here is all the data we have," was unlike anything most governments had ever offered. It was an invitation, not to panic, not to speculate wildly, but to consider, to analyze, to wonder. The ripple began quietly. Scientists in distant labs began cross-referencing the footage with other anomalous sightings. Military analysts revisited sensor data, comparing the Chilean infrared readings with patterns observed in aircraft exercises, drone tests, and other recorded phenomena. Every pixel on the screen became a story, every flicker of heat a whisper, suggesting possibilities that stretched from the mundane to the extraordinary. Public interest followed. For many, the initial fascination came from the footage itself, the glowing object, moving steadily, releasing puffs of hot material that expanded but never fell. It was the sort of thing that could appear in a dream, familiar enough to feel real, strange enough to linger in memory. Online communities dissected each frame, discussing shapes, trajectories, and timing with reverence, bordering on devotion. Some viewers leaned toward skepticism, interpreting the plumes as contrails, the shape as a distant aircraft, the infrared readings as quirks of technology. Others allowed themselves to consider more extraordinary possibilities, imagining new forms of technology or phenomena still unrecognized by science. In these debates, the Chilean incident became a quiet teacher. It demonstrated that clarity and mystery could coexist. The object was real enough to be seen and measured, yet its nature remained unresolved. That tension between evidence and interpretation, between certainty and doubt, allowed the case to become a living conversation rather than a closed chapter. At the heart of the global dialogue were two key perspectives, each grounded in evidence, each tempered by reason. The first perspective saw the object as a genuine, unidentified aerial phenomenon, something that defied conventional explanations. Proponents pointed to the combination of factors that distinguished the footage from everyday occurrences. The object, as steady movement at near helicopter speed, the lack of radar detection, the sudden thermal ejections, and the apparent three-dimensional volume observed in the infrared imagery. These observers did not leap to conclusions about extraterrestrial life or secret technology. Instead, they emphasized the importance of admitting what remains unknown, of acknowledging the limits of current understanding. The second perspective leaned toward misidentification, environmental factors, or technological artifacts. Skeptics highlighted the alignment of commercial flights along the observed trajectory, the potential for infrared glare to distort perception, and the role of contrails forming in humid conditions at high altitude. They simulated scenarios in laboratories and through software, demonstrating how distant aircraft could appear elongated, emit thermal patterns, or create optical illusions when viewed through infrared cameras. These explanations were plausible, methodical, and grounded in known physics. Yet, even these analyses occasionally fell short of accounting for every nuance observed in the footage. The beauty of this dual perspective lay not in resolving the debate, but in illustrating the complexity of observation itself. Science thrives on questioning assumptions. Curiosity grows when multiple viewpoints converge on the same mystery, each revealing different facets of what might be true. In this way, the Chilean incident became more than a case study. It became a guide for thinking carefully about anomalies, for weighing evidence without prematurely closing the door on wonder. As discussions spread across continents, The case influenced policy and practice in subtle but important ways. Countries began re-examining their own airspace protocols, evaluating how unidentified objects were reported, tracked, and investigated. In some places, regulations were updated to encourage transparency while maintaining safety. The lesson was clear. Acknowledging uncertainty responsibly does not weaken authority. It strengthens it, creating a framework where both caution and curiosity can thrive. Military analysts, in particular, noted how the incident mirrored patterns observed in other encounters, such as the U.S. Navy Tic Tac events. Objects with low observability, no obvious propulsion, and unusual thermal behavior were not unique to Chilean airspace. These shared characteristics prompted a broader reconsideration of sensor capabilities, radar limitations, and the interpretation of infrared data. The Chilean case provided a calm, well-documented reference point and anchor in an ocean of speculation. Even ordinary people, far from military or scientific institutions, found lessons in the story. Pilots shared experiences of fleeting lights and fleeting shapes, connecting their memories to the Chilean footage with new language and perspective. Teachers introduced the case in classrooms to explore scientific methodology, observation, and critical thinking. Artists and writers drew inspiration from the images and descriptions, weaving the quiet glow of the unknown into narratives that honored both beauty and enigma. Through it all, the incident maintained its serene rhythm. Unlike dramatic, sensationalized reports that flood media cycles and disappear, the Chilean object lingered. Its story moved slowly, thoughtfully, like a soft current beneath the surface of everyday life. It reminded observers that not every question needs an immediate answer, that some mysteries are more valuable for the dialogue they inspire than for the conclusions they yield. One of the subtle impacts of this ripple effect was the change in perception around UAPs. Prior to the Chilean case, reports were often dismissed, laughed off, or ignored. Witnesses sometimes feared ridicule, and organizations hesitated to allocate resources to unexplained phenomena. The transparent release of credible, detailed documentation shifted that culture. It created a space where curiosity could coexist with professionalism, where observation could be taken seriously, without requiring sensational claims. In short, it legitimized the careful study of the unknown. The debates also revealed something about human perception itself. Infrared cameras measure heat, not shape. Radar detects reflections of radio waves, not intentions or internal structure. And yet, when combined with human observation, these tools create a bridge between reality and interpretation. The Chilean incident showed that even highly trained professionals, equipped with state-of-the-art instruments, encounter limits that demand humility and ongoing inquiry. By 2025, as new sightings emerged worldwide, the Chilean case became a touchstone. Social media discussions compared it to recent encounters, noting patterns, similarities, and anomalies. Each news story referenced the 2014 event, not to claim precedence or authority, but as a reminder that uncertainty could be handled responsibly. Experts cited the case in academic papers, panels, and policy discussions. Its legacy was not resolution, but methodology, the quiet demonstration that we can confront mystery without panic, and that transparency and rigor create trust even when answers remain elusive. And yet, for all the global reflection, the incident remained intimate, personal. The helicopter crew who first glimpsed the luminous object carried that memory quietly, replaying the infrared glow in their minds, recalling the gentle rise of the thermal plume, and the impossibility of explaining it fully. Their careful reports, drawings, and recollections became threads in a broader tapestry, connecting individual experience to collective understanding. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of this chapter lies in that connection. From the technicians and pilots to international scientists, from skeptics to advocates for unexplained phenomena, every participant engaged in the same delicate dance, observing without rushing, questioning without dismissing, recording without embellishing. The Chilean incident became a model not for answers, but for a precise demonstration that curiosity, when combined with diligence and openness, cultivates wisdom. And in the quiet hours of observation, when radar screens dimmed and instruments rested, the object itself seemed to linger not as a threat, not as a solution, but as an invitation to consider, to wonder, to explore. It floated at the edge of certainty and speculation, reminding all who reflected on it that the sky is vast, that perception is delicate, and that sometimes the most meaningful discoveries emerge not from understanding, but from the patient pursuit of questions. The ripple extended further still, as policymakers, scientists, educators, and enthusiasts revisited the case, the principles embedded in it, the value of transparency, the importance of rigorous methodology, the courage to admit uncertainty spread into discussions about other unexplained events. Chile had offered not just a video, not just a report, but a template, a way to approach the unknown with calm, with respect, and with curiosity intact. In the end, the global impact of the 2014 Chilean incident was gentle but profound. It didn't scream for attention. It didn't demand belief. It whispered across continents and institutions, inviting careful listening, careful thought, and patient inquiry. In doing so, it reshaped conversations, encouraged openness, and fostered a culture in which unexplained phenomena could be studied responsibly and meaningfully. And as each discussion unfolded, each debate tempered by reason and evidence, the object in the infrared footage remained steady, serene, a reminder that even in the vast expanse above, there are things we can see, measure, and ponder, and things that remain quietly, beautifully mysterious. In this chapter, we see that impact is not always loud. Influence does not always roar. Sometimes, it ripples softly, gradually, shaping the way we think, the way we observe, and the way we honor the balance between evidence and wonder. The Chilean skies had offered a fleeting glimpse of something unusual. The world responded, and in that response, the case grew far larger than any single event. It became a lesson in humility, in diligence, and in the gentle power of curiosity. The kind of curiosity that asks questions without fear, that listens more than it speaks, that honors the unknown as much as it values the known. And as conversations continue across the world, the quiet glow of that 2014 object remains, inviting every observer to look closely, think deeply, and embrace the questions that refuse to settle. Chapter 13. The Endless Sky. As the sun dips slowly behind the Pacific horizon, casting a gentle orange glow over Chile's coast, it is easy to imagine the quiet hum of the helicopter engines, the soft flicker of infrared screens, and the steady pulse of curiosity that carried a simple patrol into something unforgettable. The 2014 incident did not end with a flash or a dramatic reveal. Instead, it settled into the minds of those who observed it, those who studied it, and those who later reflected on it from afar. Its story is not one of sudden answers, but of lingering questions, the kind that breathes slowly, steadily, like a calm wind over still waters. When we look back, we see more than the object itself. We see a chain of human experience. The trained eyes of a pilot, the careful adjustments of a FLIR operator, the diligent analysis of scientists, and the gentle curiosity of anyone who has ever looked upward and wondered. Each person became a lens, each observation a thread weaving into a larger tapestry. And in that tapestry, the sky stretches endless and serene, reminding us of the vastness beyond our reach and the humility with which we must approach it. The Chilean Navy object was unusual. Yes, it glowed brightly on infrared, moved with subtle precision, and released plumes that defied ordinary expectation. Yet it did not scream. It did not perform sudden, startling maneuvers. It moved, existed, and then disappeared, leaving only traces of heat and a sense of quiet astonishment. Its restraint is part of its elegance. There is a kind of grace in things that refuse to be sensational, in mysteries that do not demand but invite attention. For the crew inside the helicopter, that morning in November must have felt like stepping into a dream carefully layered over reality. The familiar, the sky, the ocean, the rhythm of flight, entwined with the unfamiliar, subtle enough to provoke wonder, strong enough to inspire inquiry. Every minute of the infrared footage captured more than thermal readings. It captured a dialogue between human perception and an unknown presence, an interaction that relied on attentiveness, patience, and the gentle discipline of observation. The investigation that followed was equally measured. CEFA, guided by protocol and respect for methodical analysis, treated the incident not as an anomaly to sensationalize, but as data to examine. They compiled logs, weather reports, radar readings, and witness testimony. They consulted experts in physics, chemistry, and photogrammetry, each contributing insights It illuminated aspects of the unknown without forcing it into familiar boxes. Even the skeptics played a vital role, demonstrating the ways human perception and technology could mislead, reminding everyone that curiosity must be tempered by rigor. Through all this, a delicate balance emerged. The incident was neither solved nor sensationalized. It became an enduring reminder that some questions exist to stretch the mind, rather than to settle it. There is profound value in not having immediate answers, in the quiet unfolding of the investigation, in the careful measurement of the inexplicable. We see the true gift of this story. It teaches patience, reflection, and the art of sustained attention to the mysterious. Globally, the incident had its own subtle echo. Pilots, scientists, enthusiasts, and casual observers around the world studied the footage, discussed it, and compared it to other encounters. They noted patterns in shape, movement, and thermal behavior. They considered sensor limitations, environmental factors, and human perception. But beyond analysis, the case inspired something softer, the sense that the world is larger, more complex, and more intriguing than our daily routines often allow us to feel. It whispered the gentle reminder that the sky is shared by forces and phenomena, both known and unknown, and that paying attention to them can change the way we think, act, and wonder. In a way, the Chilean Navy object became a symbol not of fear, not of proof, but of possibility. It reminded us that the unknown is not inherently threatening. It is, instead, an invitation to look, to measure, to wonder, and to acknowledge that our understanding of the universe is always incomplete. It asks quietly that we embrace questions with as much care as we embrace answers. For those who followed the investigation closely, the details mattered. The exact times, the measurements, the thermal readings, and the flight paths became touchstones for a form of disciplined curiosity. But for the broader public, the resonance of the incident was emotional, philosophical, and quietly human. It reminded people of the elegance of mystery, of the delicate thrill of watching something unexplained move gently across the sky, and of the humility required to live with uncertainty. Even now, more than a decade later, the object's presence lingers in online forums, in academic discussions, in social media threads comparing it to the Tic Tac encounters or newer sightings. The 2014 incident continues to spark questions. Each new sighting, each new observation, echoes the calm, deliberate inquiry of that November morning, reminding us that some mysteries do not age or fade, they ripple outward, touching minds and perspectives slowly, persistently, and with quiet insistence. The case also highlights the balance between knowledge and humility. Instruments can measure, people can observe, data can be analyzed, but none of these guarantees absolute understanding. The Chilean incident shows that the world is more nuanced than our instruments, more subtle than our categories, and more poetic than our expectations. And yet, this is not frustrating. It is comforting. There is something deeply human in acknowledging the limits of perception, in realizing that wonder and discipline can coexist, and that mystery itself can be a teacher. As we reflect on the object's journey from its first appearance on the flirt screen, through the careful documentation, through debates and analyses, to its enduring place in global discourse, we see a story that unfolds like a slow, soothing melody. There are no abrupt crescendos, no sudden revelations. Instead, there is rhythm, repetition, and nuance. There is curiosity, layered gently over observation, structured by evidence, and illuminated by contemplation. Perhaps the most beautiful aspect of the Chilean case is its quiet insistence on observation without panic. The object did not perform for cameras, did not respond to speculation. It simply existed in a way that demanded attention without demanding answers. Its presence encouraged thoughtfulness, patience, and careful study qualities that extend beyond UAP research into any form of inquiry, whether scientific, philosophical, or personal. In the end, the 2014 Chilean Navy incident is less about what was in the sky, and more about what it inspires in us. It is about the willingness to see clearly, to question respectfully, and to appreciate the subtle interplay between the known and the unknown. It is about carrying curiosity gently, like a candle in the night, illuminating what can be understood while casting soft light on what remains mysterious. And so, the story closes not with certainty, but with serenity. The helicopter landed. The footage was analyzed. and the object faded behind clouds. But its legacy continues, in the minds of those who witnessed it, those who studied it, and those who now imagine it. Each person who reflects on the case carries a small piece of that calm mystery, a reminder that the universe is vast, full of gentle wonders, and always inviting us to look upward with patience and care. Somewhere above the Pacific, over the endless horizon, the quiet glow of that object captured in infrared, studied in labs, debated across continents remains a symbol of the profound beauty of curiosity. It teaches that not all answers arrive on demand, that not all mysteries need immediate resolution, and that sometimes the most meaningful discoveries are the ones that live softly in our imagination, quietly shaping the way we see the world. As you let your thoughts drift, imagine the stillness of that sky, the faint shimmer of something extraordinary moving silently, and the human minds it touched along the way. The Chilean Navy incident is not a story of panic or spectacle. It is a lullaby of wonder, a meditation on observation, a gentle call to continue looking, questioning, and dreaming. And in that dream, the sky stretches on endless.com, inviting, and we are reminded that the world, in all its vastness, is more beautiful, more mysterious, and more alive when we meet it with patient attention and quiet awe. And as the night deepens, the gentle glow lingers in memory, whispering that mystery is not lost. It is simply waiting for our careful gaze, the quiet invitation of the sky. And so, as the story of that November day settles gently into memory, we find ourselves not at an ending, but at a pause, a soft, reflective moment where the sky itself seems to breathe. Across the Pacific, where the Chilean Navy helicopter once traced its careful path, the vast expanse of air and ocean stretches endless, inviting wonder, curiosity, and quiet attention. The object that appeared on that infrared screen did not scream for recognition. It did not demand a label or a hurried explanation. It simply existed, moving gracefully, releasing plumes of heat that merged with the clouds, and vanishing just as subtly as it arrived. In its silence, it reminded all who witnessed it, and all who later studied it, that the unknown need not be alarming to be extraordinary. We have followed the story from liftoff to landing, from first sight to rigorous investigation, through debates, analyses, and the gentle tug of curiosity. We have met the dedicated crew, the scientists, the skeptics, and the broader community that has kept this mystery alive. We have explored the details of shape, speed, thermal signature, and trajectory. And yet, even with all this, the object remains partly veiled, a quiet enigma against the vast canvas of sky. Perhaps the deepest lesson lies not in what it was, but in how we approached it. The Chilean Navy incident teaches us patience, careful observation, and humility. It teaches that uncertainty is not a failure, but an invitation to look closer, to think more deeply, and to allow wonder to settle gently in our hearts. It reminds us that curiosity, tempered with rigor and respect, is one of the most human and most beautiful qualities we possess. Even as years pass and new sightings appear around the world, the story holds a soft, persistent issue that the sky is vast, layered, and alive with possibility, that every unanswered question is a doorway, every mystery a meditation, and that sometimes the most meaningful discoveries are not the ones we capture, measure, or explain, but the ones that inspire us to pause, reflect, and imagine. So let the mind drift across the horizon, follow the lingering glow of what we cannot fully know, and feel the quiet wonder of the sky. The Chilean Navy UAP is not a tale of fear or spectacle. It is a lullaby of curiosity, a gentle reminder that mystery, when met with patience and care, is one of the greatest gifts the universe offers. And as your thoughts settle, remember, the sky is endless, the questions are many, and the invitation to wonder is always there, soft, patient, and quietly magnificent.